Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 621. Back at the Academy. The ship's flying speed reduced greatly. It had been decreasing since they began flying over the Isle of the Crimson Shadows. But it slowed even more as they got closer to the Academy walls. Northern stood on the cabin, watching as the sailors skillfully moved around. Some people were already folding the mast of the ship as it pulled closer to the wall of the Academy. I remember this. It had happened almost in the same fashion the first time he was on this ship, when he was just looking at things dumbfoundedly. But now it was different. With the knowledge of the tower inside him, Northern could easily make out the reason why certain things were being done. For example, he couldn't help but attribute the strange and sudden reduction of speed above the isle to the fact that the sailors were well aware of something beneath that they must not disturb or approach carelessly. Or maybe he was overestimating them. The alternative would be that whatever was beneath them was creating a kind of force field that affected the ship's trajectory movement. Maybe the speed reduction was a way to maneuver their way through it all. And the folding of the mast was necessary to kill the wind power of the airship, seeing as the engines were still very much on. The last time, from what he remembered, after all passengers disembarked, the mast was unfolded and the ship picked up speed. Also, the process of unfolding the mast would most likely be used as a centrifugal force to turn the ship without relying at all on the force field created by the Crimson Shadows. It really is brilliant. Northern breathed and watched as a part of the Academy wall carved open and extended into a bridge that connected to the base of the ship. Immediately, students and instructors alike who were traveling back to Milgard Academy walked out of the ship and over the alloy bridge into the Academy walls. Northern, after getting his fair share of stares, lifted his box and walked away gentlemanly, coming down the ship's stairs and walking fearlessly across the bridge. The Crimson Shadows crawled eerily, and from his vantage point seemed to rise a bit higher than before. But his steps did not falter. He, however, looked away and fixed his eyes on the opened cavity of the wall. A drop of sweat broke from behind his neck. Northern got into the walls and staggered, leaning on the wall with one hand. Damn it, I can't get used to those stairs. Even though he wasn't using Chaos Eyes, he could vividly feel and visualize them. The more time of perception he spent, the more apparent and suffocating the dangers became. And the most frustrating part was that he had no idea what it was or could be. A rift? A monster? Or more? Northern did not know. That thing did not fit into the classification of any existence he had come to know about. Not even a tyrant or an origin. Northern's eyes this time did not widen. Instead, a gloomy scowl folded the features of his face as the view of the Academy entered his vision once more. The effect of winter was already heavy on the surroundings. Hence most of the trees had dried up and frozen. Petals of snow were falling like a rain of flowers. On the ground, in corners and here and there, heaps of sand had gathered to adorn the land with a cold beauty. Northern, from the gateway, could see the enormous and towering glass buildings. They bore an almost striking resemblance to skyscrapers from the world he had reincarnated from. There were several other buildings that fit right into that theme of an academy, few with lower heights than the glass buildings, but even they were magnificently architected. The gateman looked at Northern strangely. Wordlessly, Northern brought out the Academy's letter inviting him for an interview and his identity card. The man got up and said to him, "Follow me." He was led to the right where they entered a glass transparent lift. Northern's gaze remained sharp as the glass lift descended, offering him a panoramic view of Milgard Academy. The sprawling campus beneath was a blend of elegance and practicality, its snow-blanketed paths winding between the towering structures. Students and faculty bustled about below, their figures reduced to mere specks. Their prestigious white and blue uniforms, fashioned into a modern style, consisting of V-neck shirts tucked neatly into long white trousers adorned with blue stripes along the sides, subtly flowed with the soft cold wind. Northern's feet finally touched the ground, and a small smile carved upward on his lips. "It's funny how I am walking into this place twice, and never walked out once. I will escort you to the Trife Gazel Hall." Northern had no idea what that was, but he guessed it was where he would be meeting whomever would be interviewing him, since the man at the gateway had carefully gone through the invite from the academy. The man and Northern climbed a wide and numerous array of stairs and passed through a towering arch that stood almost as a relic of a forgotten era. Its colossal pillars were draped with soft light from the clear blue sky. Golden statues, worn but proud, flanked the entrance, each etched with the meticulous detail of masterful hands long past. The figures seemed alive, their eyes cast downward as if watching the walker's every step. Northern passed a few students coming from the inner compound of the academy and met even more inside. Some of them threw glances at Northern, while many did not care, going about their business like every other day. Soon, Northern and the man had cut across the corners between several buildings and were climbing a narrow, long, and winding staircase. Northern kept count. The stairs were over 700 steps before they eventually entered a large and enormous hall. "I don't think I have ever consciously walked this far." Along every step of the way, Northern had been silently wondering when they would reach their destination. The hall they now walked in was a cathedral of light and shadow, its columns stretching impossibly high, etched with swirling, intricate patterns that seemed to hum with the echo of sentient runes. Pale blue light spilled through the massive archways, illuminating the frost-kissed mountains beyond, their icy peaks standing as silent sentinels to the sanctity of the space. The air inside was cool and carried the faint scent of stone and snow, a quiet contrast to the grandeur before them. Echoes of their steps traveled far and wide to all corners in a soothing rhythm of sound. They continued to walk through several fat and tall pillars, and Northern was almost at his limit. He was almost about to ask his guide when exactly they would get to their destination when the man turned to the left, walking into the shadows cast between two pillars. Northern was shocked. It hadn't occurred to him that there could be a way there, and he had even missed when shadows began to occur between the pillars because of how tired he was. He followed anyway and grew even more surprised as they climbed stairs so wide that 100 people could hold hands and walk on them at the same step. After the stairs, they passed through an arching doorway and entered a grandiose hall. The hall's pristine white walls glowed faintly under the soft golden light of an ornate chandelier that hung high above. The room was a symphony of symmetry, with twin sweeping staircases curving upward like the arms of a poised host welcoming its guests. Each step was dressed in a pale blue carpet, the fabric rich and flawless, cascading down like streams of frozen water. Banners adorned the walls, their deep azure contrasting with the pale elegance of the surroundings, each emblazoned with a crest that whispered of old traditions and the unshakable authority of the academy. Marble lions perched on the balustrades, their faces regal yet fierce, as if silently guarding the secrets of the place. Golden sconces lined the walls, holding lanterns whose gentle light flickered like stars, casting faint shadows that danced across the immaculate floor. Northern and the man's footsteps echoed softly as they entered and climbed the curving stairs on their right. They walked through another hallway and finally came before a double door. The man stopped in front of the door and spoke to Northern for the first time since they started walking. "This is the head examiner's office?" Northern sighed. "Finally. I wonder if he ever goes to the gate." Chapter 622. Professor Heimberger. After the man's knock, the door moved slightly, opening a little bit, enough for golden light to seep through. He looked at the guy, who stepped back a little bit and gestured for Northern to move inside with his hands. Northern swallowed and gently pushed the door open and entered the office. The place was a grand interior that stood in solemn splendor, the warm glow of candlelight flickering across the ornate furnishings. An impressive wooden desk dominated the center of the room, its intricate carvings and gilded trim betraying the wealth and status of its owner. Towering bookcases lined the side of the room to the left, filled with tomes spanning subjects from history to philosophy. Antique globes, brass instruments, and other curiosities sat atop the shelves, lending an air of scholarly sophistication. Ornate Gothic-style windows framed the view outside, the fading daylight casting a warm glow across the richly appointed space. A plush area rug covered the ornate tile floor, its swirling patterns adding visual interest. In one corner, a seating area with finely upholstered armchairs invited guests to converse or peruse the owner's collection. Northern looked around for a few moments. He had expected to see the owner of this place behind his luxurious table, but the high chair sat alone. But he was sure the door had opened and the guide that brought him all the way here had gestured for him to come in like someone was inside. He suddenly heard the sound of something tumbling on each other. Northern narrowed his eyes and turned his head to where the sound had come from, using his delicate eyes to see through the shelves of books. Behind the third shelves, a pile of books had fallen. "Heyo! Little help here, anybody?" A thick but slightly rough voice sounded. The voice was as if mucus was permanently stuck in their throat. Northern quickly moved across the shelves and removed the pile of books, grabbed the man's hand and pulled him up. The first thing Northern noticed about the man was the tough and rough palms the moment his hands touched the man's, then the strength it took to lift the man out of the pile of books. Usually he wouldn't be worried about the strength it took, but Northern felt like he had drawn much of his strength that he should have needed to pull a man of this height. His eyes fell down on the figure that was dusting his violently draping cloak. Hiya, lad. Thank you. I thought I was going to die in there, hey." The man's white, flowing beard was enormous enough for a bird to nest within it and live for days without being noticed. Perhaps by the way his hands kept digging into it and combing through, there was one already living there? Northern stood, frozen, astonished by the Santa that was standing right before him. Santa Claus. But if he wasn't mistaken, the height, the beard, the structure of the man's face, the way his eyes curved downwards, reflecting a deep, foreboding well that held in its depth eons of wisdom. His face was marked by prominent lines of age and experience, conveying a sense of profound knowledge. He stood upright, and the best he could do was reach just below Northern's waist. What a profound shortness! He can't be a dwarf, can he? Northern wasn't sure dwarves were a confirmed existence in this world. But if elves were, then there was a possibility that dwarves existed too. If so, what else would explain this astonishing height for such an old man? Even how is not this short? "Hey boy, you must be the new applicant for the position of hiya, what's it again?" He scratched his bush of a beard as he struggled to remember. "Instructor," Northern whispered lightly, saving both of them from the old man's dying brain. "Hiya, that it is. But that position now, boy, holds too significant value to be given out haphazardly, you know," the man said as he walked out of the bookshelves, slowly making his way back to the main room. Northern followed closely from behind, a little bent, he didn't know why. The man was clearly older than him by perhaps decades. The air around the old man just sort of demanded it. The man paused and walked around his table. Northern watched as the man struggled to climb the tall chair. He lifted himself up with his arms and used his legs to climb upon the chair. After that, he collapsed on the seat for a few seconds, breathing heavily, before sitting up on the chair. His head barely managed to rise above the table. Northern shook his head slightly after watching all these unfold. "Yeah. No way he goes to the gate." The man picked a set of small round glasses and fixed them onto his eyes, resting them on his pointed nose. He rummaged through the files on his table and brought out a particular one, looking through it while digging his fingers into his white beard. I have your papers here with me. They do speak well of you. And hey, you are a prodigy. I almost find this impossible to believe. A sage at 16. Northern stood silently, crossing his hands behind his back and watching the man read through the papers for a few more seconds. He finally dropped it and fixed Northern with his deep scrutinizing gaze. "Hiya. My name is Professor Heimberger Gandalf. You can call me Professor Heim for short. Some delinquent lads dare to call me the Short Burger Professor. I advise you not to partake in such flapdoodle." Northern nodded. "Trust me. I can tell how infuriating that can be." Rest assured, I understand your situation and fully relate to it. The professor paused for a moment, blinking in confusion. I'm not sure what you mean, but hey, come, sit here, let's start your interview. Professor Heimberger pointed to one of the chairs in front of his table, looking at Northern. Chapter 623, The Interview. Northern, following the man's kind gesture, stepped forward and sat down on the plush brown chair. He tensed slightly. Again in his life, he was in a position where he felt he could not control the outcome of this certain event. The feeling made him nervous and irritated at the same time. He clenched his hands tightly. Hey, no need for you to be nervous now, boy. This is going to be a walk in the park. Northern smiled politely and made it clear in a calm and cold tone. I am not nervous at all, Professor Heim. The chunky professor gave Northern a serious and somewhat unreadable expression, then cleared his throat. A few seconds of silence drifted through the luxurious office, raising the luminescence banner of the bright day star as golden light radiantly permeated the tall windows behind the professor. The place was almost blinding, but the rays of light shifted subtly and did not obstruct anything, especially not Northern's vision. The man's thick and mature voice pierced through the silence with a lace of seriousness that seemed to densify the air. So, here it says you have never attended the academy. Professor Heimberger lowered his eyeballs to look at Northern through his glasses. Yes. And you want to be an instructor here? Northern nodded carefully. Yes. The professor went silent, closing his downturned eyes for a moment as he shook his head. He opened his eyes and met Northern's gaze with an intense look of passion. Young boy, Rian, you are full of talent. You are an outstanding and marvelous existence. You are what this world would refer to as a prodigy. A sage at 16 years old, the world has never seen such a phenomenon. You, boy, are extraordinary. Northern squinted his eyes. Don't tell me this guy is about to give me unwarranted advice? His guess was impeccably correct. Heimberger's voice continued to ring in Northern's ears without pause. Now, if you were to take all that talent and put it into learning, can you imagine what you would achieve? You would be the best to ever exist. I know you have responsibilities, you want to get paid and also enjoy the privileges of an instructor, but hey, lad, 4 years is just a blink away. You'll be done with your section of learning and ready to work. Northern's entire disposition suddenly shifted. His expression became grave. Aside from the obvious change in his eyes, there were some unseen things that could very well be felt by someone of Heimberger's caliber. After all, he kept his mouth shut suddenly and blinked several times, even trying to withstand the burning glint in Northern's ethereal blue eyes. You seem to be mistaken about a few things, Professor. The professor almost leaped out of his skin at the cold sound of Northern's voice. I am not trying to be the best to ever exist. Why should I try to be something that I already am? Despite being a sage, there's not a single person in this academy that can drive me to one knee. To simply put, this place has nothing to offer to me, nothing to teach an existence such as myself. The professor's brows curved slightly. Oh? Did I annoy you? Or sound too cocky? Is that what you think? I could show you. Here, take my hand, Northern said, stretching out his hand on the table for Heimberger to take. Heimberger hesitated, an unsure look drifting through his pupils like uncoordinated winds. Sure, boy. He pressed his lips and slowly touched Northern's hand. The moment he did, however, he jumped instantaneously, attempting to leap as far away from Northern as he could, smacking his fragile frame against the window and slipping down like a wiped-off stain. He lay on the ground wide-eyed, heaving with buckets of sweat rolling down his face. Northern rose from the shadows he cast on the ground, bending in front of the professor. Do you understand a fraction of what I am trying to say? What are you? What is that darkness? In all my 150 years of living, I have never seen such a force of existence. Who are you? Northern shrugged. You tell me. I am not the one who has lived for 150 years, he said and stood up. Then he put his hands in his pocket, looking down on the professor, his chin raised. I have no desire to become a student. It's also understandable if you can't give me the position of an instructor. I will just take my leave. Now to rely on what Thalen had said. Northern turned away and was walking, but Professor Heimberger's voice called for him. Boy! Northern's lips immediately curled up. The professor slowly got up to his feet, his breath rough as he found it difficult to flawlessly piece his speech together. We cannot offer you the position of an instructor just like that. Even that of an interim instructor. There's a strict rule of the academy never to hire outsiders. We only hire people who graduated from this school. However, I could make an exception for you. If you promise me one thing. Northern narrowed his eyes. I don't like where this is going. He lingered for a few minutes, his eyes drifting here and there. Then his focus returned, as did his voice. What is this promise? You will accept. You will accept the position. Northern tilted his head slightly with a puzzled look on his face. The promise you want me to make to you is that I will accept the offer you want to make to me? Professor Heimberger nodded with a serious look on his weathered face. That is weird, but sure, I guess. What is your condition? Northern asked while thinking. What matters is that I am able to do the things that I need to do. The professor's mood seemed to lift as he exhaled and spoke. I will offer you a position of interim assistant instructor, my assistant instructor. You will, however, still have to pick up a course because the academy rules are the academy rules. You can pick up shorter years courses. When you are done, you can be promoted to a full instructor. Northern was silent for a few seconds, thinking. Then he asked, is craftsmanship, particularly blacksmithing, part of these shorter years courses? Oh yes, of course. You'll find any kind of craftsmanship in the academy, taught by the very best of the continents. And must I be your assistant instructor? Professor Heimberger nodded gravely. That part is important. Northern narrowed his eyes at the professor. After showing him a short depth of the void, what he wants is for me to be his assistant. Now that is suspicious and interesting. A corner of his lips curled. But it doesn't matter what his agenda is. I can just kill him if it gets in my way. What matters is I am able to do the things I want to do. One more thing. This is very important. Professor Heimberger's eyes lit up as Northern's voice rang out. Yes, boy? Do I have to report to you every day? From the main campus all the way to this place? Huh? No, child. I have an office in the main compound that you will be in charge of. You will only need to come here when I summon you, which will be very few, as we can communicate without having to see each other. Seeing you, in fact, devastates my gentle soul. Northern smiled contentedly. All right then, this can work. Chapter 624. Within Expectations. After accepting the offer, Northern was shown his way back to the main campus, specifically to the dormitory. Because he was a part-time student and an interim assistant instructor, he was given a personal dormitory for himself. However, it was still attached to the student's dormitory and not the instructor's quarters. One way or another, he was still somewhat of a student. The only difference was that he had the liberty to not attend some classes without anyone questioning him. He still needed to participate in school events and special programs and could join the student council if he qualified. The professor had even mentioned that a tailor would come around to take his measurements, after which his set of student uniforms would be sent. When Northern thought about wearing a student uniform, it didn't feel entirely right or wrong. He was 16 years old, after all. He sighed softly as his eyes drifted across the room. The prominent color of the air was a luxurious cream that seemed to proudly lament its subtle, calming beauty. To one corner was Northern's bed, which was meant for him alone. It wasn't as large as the master bed he had slept on in Therian Citadel, but it was a vast improvement from the single bed he had occupied during his prison days at his first rift. It seemed large enough for two people to sleep on if they lay on their sides. Next to the wall at the head of the bed was his wardrobe, a two-door piece that would accommodate all of his luggage. Beyond the wardrobe was the room's window. From his window, he could see the generous compound of the dormitory. The angle of his window allowed him to peer towards the garden on the left side and a portion of the fountain. He could also see a small part of the pathway that led to the gate, though not the gate itself. The academy had several dormitories, and this was just one of them, built in a large royal mansion style, with numerous windows mounting the front, sides, and back of the gigantic edifice. 2 dining halls existed in the building, and every student was expected to converge and eat in both halls. Of course, he could choose not to eat at the dining hall due to the privileges of his unique student status, but he still had to go there to receive his food. Northern was unsure how he would fare among a crowd of spoiled kids who deluded themselves with controlled and contained strength. Within the walls of the academy, the strongest of them couldn't compare to the weakest of the survivors from the Dark Continents. Sure, he might outpower them in talent, but experience, dangerous wit, and the resolve of a diseased vermin that the survivor had developed over time could, if not careful, crush the Goldspawn's entire will. All that he had been taught would mean nothing before someone who had been ruthlessly schooled by the Dark Continent for almost 2 years. And yes, Northern was not fond of these kids at all. He turned away from the window, walking barely 5 steps to his table and chair, situated at the opposite corner of the wall. The door leading to his bathroom and toilet was in the 3rd corner of the room, positioned opposite the foot of his bed. The 5th corner led to the hallway. Northern pulled out the chair and sat down, laying his head on the table and closing his eyes for a moment. Slowly, his consciousness drifted into a cloudy, smoky, and comforting darkness, and he fell asleep. A man with slicked-back silver hair was walking down the same hallway Northern had traversed several hours ago. The evening light cast an orange glow on one side of his figure, ghastly reflecting off his scar-ridden face. His eyes emitted a soft lavender glow as he walked forward, his face as rigid as a stone boulder. His entire form was beyond physically fit, his shoulders wide and huge, his frame and body so defined, as if the hands of an obsessed sculptor had painstakingly carved every detail. Each movement of his legs created a sinking, echoing sound that traveled through the air, resonating with the rest of his body in a perfect, synchronized motion. The scars on his face seemed more than enough to tell the crude level of his experience. The stony, focused, and sharp look in his eyes reflected the subdued madness of a warrior. He finally reached the professor's office, knocked, and entered. The professor was pacing at his table when the man entered. The man's voice, as imposing as his appearance, like thick cracks breaking through a strong wall, resounded. "Professor, you summoned me."
Ah, Instructeur Darville.
"There is something urgent that I must discuss with you." Instructor Darville, noticing Professor Heimberger's rough breathing and forming sweat, furrowed his brows slightly. "Professor, is everything all right? You seem to be hyperventilating." "Don't worry about me. I am fine. You are the only one I can trust with this information. I also trust that you will not, under any circumstances, engage him. If what I saw in that boy is more enormous than he showed, that alone makes him a threat that no one can single-handedly handle in the academy." Professor Darville's frown became gravely serious. "What are you talking about, Professor?" The professor wiped the perspiration from his forehead with the back of his hand and stood still, facing Instructor Darville. "I just admitted a new part-time student into the craftsmanship course. He is also an interim assistant instructor to me." Instructor Darville's mouth opened slightly, his eyes widening with surprise. "If the rumors are true, you've never been known to use an assistant in the past 100 years of your life in this academy. What brought about this sudden decision?" Though expressing surprise, Darville's tone remained measured, controlled, and empty. "He is dangerous. I can't let anyone else supervise him. In the right hands, he could be a savior, and in the wrong hands, he could be a disaster. I trust you, Darville. Aside from graduating from the academy, you've been teaching here for over 10 years. I want you to carefully observe and watch this boy. Watch what he does, but do not engage him in anything." Instructor Darville, his softly glinting eyes fixed on the professor, nodded. "All right, Professor. I will do that." Northern finally raised his head after an unexpected but comforting sleep. His eyes glowed eerily as he straightened his back. As expected, predictable fools, he muttered. Chapter 625. Full Potential. After the tailor came to take his measurements, Northern spent 2 days indoors before his uniform arrived, and he was eventually ready for his first day of school. During those 2 days, he kept himself busy with 2 important tasks. The first was meditation. Now that 2 entirely different entities resided in his body, he wanted to ensure he had, if not complete control, at least some understanding of them. Hence, he meditated repeatedly, not trying to control or direct the flow of chaos and void. In fact, these 2 entities had different flows. He didn't notice the void essence flowing within his veins at all. This led him to an amazing discovery. He was packed with such an endless amount of void essence that it needn't flow. Usually, the flow of essence in the body is directed through meditation and cultivated by a specific, tailored style to help the drifter achieve several results. The goal was to make the essence last longer and become more dense, making it possible to reinforce the body with essence. Reinforcing weapons and armor with essence was an entirely different challenge that only the most formidable drifters could achieve. Regardless of rank, essence cultivation became available to every drifter the moment they became a master. Chaos, however, was different. It had a flow, and he had only a small amount running in his body. The flow was unpredictable. When he tried following it, he became confused and lost several times. It took him time to finally realize that the chaos flow had no 2 patterns alike. It was pure havoc wreaking havoc in his body. The only reason this could actively occur in his body, while he remained fine on the outside, was due to the corelessness and formlessness of his soul. In the 2 days of trying to understand void and chaos, he was unable to discover anything new. Void, he already knew sufficient information about, since the void itself resided in him, its memories buried somewhere in his memory. But the chaos, a much larger part of it existed elsewhere, and Northern couldn't help but feel liable. Unless he absorbed that larger part, he didn't think he'd be able to rid himself of the feeling. After absorbing the chaos core of the rift, his chaos essence and body had grown tremendously. However, when compared to the vast amount of void essence he possessed, it was like a bright illuminant struggling to shine within a world of shadows, slowly sinking into darkness, its light barely generating. This was why he needed to find the rest of those plague rifts. They were his only lead to obtaining more chaos essence. But right now, all that would need to wait until 2 years. What he wanted to do was endlessly absorb talents for the next 6 months. After which, he would dedicate himself to growth, learning, and rigorous training for the next 2 years. The second thing Northern was able to control was his combat mastery. After Dante's demonstration, things had taken an easier turn for him. Plus, thanks to chaos, he was getting more of a handle on his body. The speed talent absorbed into his body became much more usable. Northern successfully inspected all other areas of his talents, both new and old. One talent Northern knew little about, even after gaining 2 new ranks and abilities, was Sincere Embers. He had not been giving the talent much attention, despite it belonging to the caliber of a paragon. Plus, it now had 9 abilities. After inspecting it, he discovered that the ability was the strongest within his possession, subjectively. When talking about pure applications without any boost from void and chaos essence, or him DIYing the ability like he had done with ice manipulation, Sincere Ember was purely the strongest. The 2 abilities Northern was familiar with were Fire Feet and Eternal Blaze. Fire Feet applied heat and flames to his feet to increase his speed and kick damage simultaneously, while Eternal Blaze rose pillars of flames with heat intense enough to vaporize water. Then he had 7 more unexplored abilities: Son of Flame, Heat Compass, Flame Sword, Flame Frenzy, Hidden Moon, Sharnsair, Embrace of the Lost Heat. Son of Flame could create a sun that would sit behind his back and generate flame blasts for as long as his essence was available. With it, it became harder for anyone to come closer to him, since the heat around him raised a vaporizing smoke that drifted endlessly. Heat Compass was a simple ability that easily detected presence and attacks based on minimal heat generation, thus allowing his attacks and counterattacks to never miss the mark. He could never miss any attack coming. It was a similar ability to Danger Sense, with each one filling in for the other's weaknesses. Danger sense was useless if his enemy managed to attack without the intent of killing him or erased the danger of their attack in some way. Heat compass was useless if his enemy moved without generating heat, which was impossible. As long as motion is involved, heat is generated. But nothing was impossible in Ultrail, especially if his target turned out to be a tyrant or an origin. He'd be cooked. In such a case, one ability was bound to fill in for the other. And danger sense was a part of him that was always active thanks to Chaos Eyes absorbing eyes of intent. Flame Sword, as the name implied, created a sword made out of flames and could create as many as hands required. However, each flame sword was limited to a single explosive attack. When Northern saw the firepower in the limitless void, he understood why the Emperor of Luengard did not use his full power. Simply, there was no way that small empire would have survived it. Flame Frenzy was a power-up. It filled him with hysterical strength and caused flames to envelope his entire body. He felt his strength double as the flames swallowed his form and fervently danced across his body. Hidden Moon was an ability that masked him in hot black smoke. Apart from making him invincible and invisible, anyone trapped inside suffered a slow heat deterioration of their body. As for the rest, Northern did not have enough time to test them out. He was interrupted by the delivery of his school uniform. Chapter 626. Pretty Boy. Northern stood in front of his wardrobe. When he opened the right door, it revealed an inbuilt mirror on the other side. He stared at himself for a long time, grooming his hair and smoothing out every single rumple on the ensemble. Apart from being a part-time student, Northern was in the non-combative part of the academy. They were known for wearing black instead of the usual academy white. Like every other student, they wore a white v-neck inner shirt with black pants and could choose between knee-high boots or fine, sleek shoes. Northern opted for the latter, a set of boots he had acquired in South Drywall and worn to Arcadia. These boots had marched through blood-soaked ground and remained sturdy. This was Northern's only reason for not wearing the new pairs of shoes that came with the uniform. Instead of black stripes on the sides of the trousers, theirs had blue. A black jacket was worn over the v-neck ancient-style inner shirt. Their uniform, Northern considered, was peculiar. It had a confusing blend of ancient Eastern dressing and modernity. Could have been a coincidence, or he was not the first person from Earth to come to Ultrail. He had often thought about this since the day he heard of his father's last name. But he had always instantly shoved such thoughts to the back of his mind. Those were not the times to concern himself with such matters. And even now he was not concerned. Yet he didn't mind finding out. Since the academy was a repository of knowledge, he would be on the lookout for this information. On the jacket, he could choose to use a belt at its waist or let it fly around his body. Lastly was his school badge. Northern walked over to the table, his feet kicking the nylon packaging. He looked at the bronze medal on the table and picked it up. Since he was in a non-combative school, he did not receive a ranked badge. Ranked badges were divided into 3 colors: bronze, silver, and gold. The ranks of one's soul or class of talent had nothing to do with how the ranked badges were distributed. They were based solely on entrance examination performance. There was no hierarchy among non-combative students, so they automatically received a bronze badge, placing them at the weakest point. Of course, should there be any need for a student to prove they were not weak, they always had their identity card from either a private or public citadel. But this badge alone subjected students to an instantaneous societal classification that could either break or make them. Northern took another deep look at the badge. It had his name inscribed upon it. Lael Artemis Rian. He called the name with pride and fixed the badge on his chest. Then he went back to the front of the wardrobe, gently pulling out the door and checking himself one last time. The length of his hair had been cut to just above eye level and then tinted black and blue. The black and blue hue of his hair gave him a very unique and flawlessly handsome edge. His eyes were sharp and narrow. His blue eyeballs looked like an incomprehensible ocean of suppressed darkness, held within the swift and unreadable glance of a young, pretty boy. Northern raised a corner of his lips, touching his chin slightly. Crap, I might fall in love with myself at this rate. Who'd have thought black hair fits me better than white? Or is it because of the tint at the edges and roots? Northern squinted his eyes and meticulously checked as he thought aloud. He eventually shrugged and turned away, grabbing the bottomless cross bag. It had gone through a thorough washing, and after all it had been through, the bag had regained its plush brown leather look. Northern wore it across his torso and walked out of his room, throwing one last glance at his luxurious cubicle before locking the door and strutting down the hallway. While walking, Northern met several other students, many of whom wore white rather than black. In fact, he looked like the only person from this dormitory who belonged to the non-combative school. People worked in pairs of 2, 3, and 4 and threw glances at him. The girls blushed and whispered among themselves. The guys glared at him with contemptuous eyes. Northern, however, did not care enough to look at anyone twice. The only one he was looking for was anyone wearing black, because this place was too gigantic for him to find the non-combative school on his own. Northern finally reached outside the gate. He stood and watched everyone walk towards the right like a flock of scattered ships. Then he turned his head to the left and was about to open Chaos Eyes to stretch his vision's distance limit but stopped midway. Wow, cool. You detected me. Northern turned around, disgust wrinkling his nose. He was silent for a second before responding, his tone dripping with irritation. Yes, I did. Most people can't. It's not because of lack in abilities. It's because of my low essence. The boy standing in front of Northern blabbed. The boy had short, slightly messy silver blonde hair, with a few loose strands running over the goggles he wore on his forehead. He had a cheerful and confident demeanor, smiling brightly with a relaxed posture, as he spouted his entire life's secrets to Northern in barely 2 seconds of meeting. I was born with a low essence talent. I have a cool, amazing talent that makes me able to produce lightning, but because of my low essence, I can't even generate enough lightning to power an illuminant. Ha 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 ha. It's so funny. I know, right? Northern, with utter confusion squeezing his facial features, looked at the boy from head to feet and feet to head. He was clothed in a high-necked shirt layered under leather straps and a harness, giving him a rugged and adventurous look. A silver dog tag hung around his neck. His rolled-up sleeves revealed muscular forearms, showing he was accustomed to labor. A black jacket was tied around his waist, adding a casual vibe, and a small tool peeked out from the utility belt he was wearing. "Who are you supposed to be?" Northern inquired with a raised eyebrow. "Oh, nonsense. I didn't even introduce myself. I thought I could sneak up on you when I saw that you were wearing black. I used to sneak up on so many people, and many people would not even realize that I was there. If I wanted to be a thief, I bet I'd be a prominent one." "Haha, that was just a joke." He paused, chuckling a bit, staring down at Northern with his sharp green almond-shaped eyes. He looked stupid and intelligent at the same time, a little difficult to put into words, like a generally dumb person, but tremendously intellectual in a certain area, perhaps even a genius. Northern shook his head. "Nah, this one is just talkative." Chapter 6:27. Blabbermouth. Northern glared obstinately into the guy's eyes. At that point, he almost shivered, scratching the side of his hair and smiling with his eyes.
Ah, forgive me.
I have this tendency to derail. Sometimes, I can just be talking about serious matters and I just start derailing and talking about things that don't matter. Northern's glare intensified, almost shooting lasers. The boy, as he met Northern's gaze, quickly recollected himself. "Oh, nonsense. Look at me doing it again. My name is Asterman Felaman. You can call me Aster." Northern sighed almost silently. "All right, Aster. Do you know where people that wear this uniform," Northern pointed to himself, "usually go to?" "Of course. That was actually why I approached you. I am a second-year artificer. Did you doll up like that because it's your first day?" Northern squeezed his face, raising a brow. "I beg your pardon? Oh, you are new. Dolls is a term we use for the other school that loves to wear their uniform all the time 24/7. But we are allowed to wear anything we want, as long as it permits you to work without any dangers. Now, this school uniform, for us non-combative students, is just a ceremonial dress. Northern opened his mouth slightly. I see. That explains why I didn't see anyone wearing what I was wearing. Very few of us stay in Ptolemy dormitory, but yes, that too. Northern took a glance at the gate. It was there, arching over the gate of the dormitory, Aston Ptolemy. If there was one thing he had noticed since his 3 days in the academy, it was the fact that this was the norm with almost every building. For example, the gateman that took him to Professor Heim 3 days ago had called the building Trife Gazel Hall. And then there was Ptolemy dormitory. He couldn't be too sure until he saw this motif in several other buildings, and Northern considered this too trivial to ask Astor about. If he could, he would love to keep things silent between him and the blabbermouth, although he doubted if that was going to be possible. Northern looked at the boy. So Astor, can you take me to the non-combative school? What course? I am doing the artificing course like I said before. I am an artificer, so yes, of course I am doing artificing. Ha ha ha. Blacksmithing and weapon forging. Northern interrupted. Oh, blacksmithing? Astor gave Northern a stare that insinuated he was judging. With that body? The guys in blacksmithing are usually more. Can you lead the way? The look in Northern's eyes suddenly made it difficult to keep his carefree and running mouth nature. Astor stifled his mouth and swallowed whatever words he had left. Then he turned to the right. Follow me, please. Right? Guess I was wrong. Northern followed the blabbermouth. For the first few seconds, everywhere was silent. Northern was happy about it. The silence and peace as they walked allowed him to concentrate on the Daystar for once in his life. Its luminance was soft and warm. Because of the distance of the star from them, it was a bit dissolved by several atmospheric rays. This not only dulled the intensity of the heat emitted, but also affected the spectrum of colors it refracted, hence casting a pale violet with a slight hint of golden glow on the surrounding. It was an ecstatic beauty. Northern couldn't help but picture a family picnic on a rich lush of grass, with these resplendent light rays gently beating their exposed skin. But he was also well aware that this was wishful thinking. At least, right now, it is. So, I didn't quite catch your name, fella. And this was where Northern's silent peace came to a saddening end. I didn't throw it either. Northern's response was curt and rude in all manners. His entire disposition was enough to inform any sane person to mind their business and walk on. But either Astor just didn't seem to get the message or was born from the laborious womb of stubbornness. You know, I am from the kingdom of Yale. Northern continued to walk forward without answering, his gaze straight and stern. And yet, in the kingdom of Yale there are several strong drifters. I don't know if you are familiar with the world of drifters. You should know the Voiceless Crow. He is from Yale and belongs to Shunin Citadel, which is part of the top 5 strongest citadels in the world. Do you know even he wasn't able to make it to the academy because he failed the exam? They said he was talentless and offered him a non-combative course. Northern continued walking painstakingly. They say that people in non-combative school will never amount to anything because they are useless. But the Voiceless Crow proved them wrong. Today he is the best scout to ever exist, and every citadel, even the government, would die to have him. I am proud to say I am a citizen of Yale today because Voiceless Crow never gave up, because my elder brother never gave up. He beamed with a radiant smile and looked at Northern as they trekked forward. Don't be sad that you got a non-combative course. If you set your heart to it, you will become strong, the best. You will become great. All you need is determination and a spirit that never gives up. Northern paused. He turned to Astor with a grim expression darkening his facial features. Astor. Yes, fella? How many more minutes till we get to the blacksmithing and weapon forging building? You can just call it La Rosa Workshop. Whatever the dumbfuck it is called, I really don't care, Astor. How many more minutes? Oh, you. Astor feverishly blew air through his mouth like he wanted to whistle. You are an edgy one, aren't you? Northern's dark and dangerous gaze lingered. In 10 more minutes we will probably get there. Northern dropped his shoulders with a sigh. Dumbfuck. 10 more minutes to suffer? Lead the way, he said, dispirited. Sure. Aster took the front, his relaxing and carefree demeanor quickly returning like it never left. He gave it a rest for a few seconds, then his voice rang out again. You know, the point I am trying to say is you can be great too even without being in the combative school. You can also be like my brother, Voiceless Crow, who is now a master and a renowned scout. Darn. I can't take this anymore. Northern paused, his brows twitching. He turned his face to Aster. Seeing Northern's gloomy face and suddenly feeling an oppressive coldness around him, Aster gulped, dropping a pearl of sweat. Did I ever complain to you, Aster? He fervently shook his head. No, you did not. Good. Thank you regardless. I would have needed it if you told me 2 years ago. But now I am great already. Your speech is useless. Northern went silent and breathed in deeply. The look in his eyes became even more dark, softly glinting with an azure light. Now for the rest of these 9 minutes we have left, if you speak again, those 9 minutes are going to be the worst 9 minutes of your life, both the past and the future. I promise you, Aster. I promise you with everything in me. As his voice dropped between them, Aster couldn't help but feel like a sharp dagger laced with poison was insidiously sweeping across his thick neck. Chapter 628. First Day in School, Part 1. Aster didn't need to announce where they were. From a distance, as they walked closer, Northern could already hear the crude clangor of metals frivolously ripping the air apart. As they approached the smithy, the first thing he noticed was its sheer scale. The building stood like a fortress of industry, its walls constructed from dark stone that bore the marks of time and countless fiery battles. Massive Oregon iron beams reinforced the structure, their rivets glowing faintly as if imbued with latent heat. The roof, a sweeping dome of the same Oregon metal but more blackened than the beams, caught the sunlight, reflecting it in golden flashes where it wasn't dulled by soot. A towering chimney pierced the sky, belching columns of smoke that mingled with the low-hanging clouds, announcing the forge's activity against the backdrop of the mountain and wildlife. Around its base, a network of pipes and vents hissed with the steady exhalation of steam, lending the air a humid, metallic tang. Aster's steps finally came to a stop, and so did Northern's. Unmiraculously, Northern's threat had worked perfectly. Northern had meant every word of the threat. If Aster had continued talking, his plan was to release all the void aura he had been suppressing since entering and have the boy pass out cold on the ground. The blabbermouth pointed to the industry-like building before them. There is La Rosa Workshop. Northern already knew anyone would, given how announcing the building itself was. I see. Thank you, Aster. Northern gave a short response and focused on the building. He thought Aster would have silently walked away until he heard the boy's modulated voice reach his ears. So won't you at least give me your name? Can't keep calling you, fella, forever, you know? Northern sighed internally, looked over his shoulder and said to Aster, My name is Lael or Artemis, whichever suits you. Okay, I'll just go ahead and call you Art, because now we are friends. Northern rolled his eyes away and started to stroll towards the smithy. My workshop is just a stone's throw away from here, you know, towards your right. Northern closed his eyes for a moment and willfully ignored the boy's shout. Very few people were walking around this place, and Northern liked that not even one of them cared enough to look in his direction. Everyone strode with a level of haste and purpose that insinuated they were super busy. Northern finally stopped close in front of La Rosa Workshop, breathing in the edifice before bringing his gaze down. The entrance was marked by double doors crafted from solid steel, etched with intricate carvings of roaring flames, twisting gears, and mythical creatures, symbols of creation and destruction. Each door was flanked by statues of hammer-wielding smiths, their faces stoic and their stances powerful, as if they guarded the secrets of the craft within. Above the doorway, a massive cogwheel spun lazily, powered by some unseen mechanism, its rhythmic clinking underscoring the smithy's heartbeat. As Northern entered the smithy, the first thing he noticed in the enormous, hot space were wagons laden with mineral ore and supplies queuing at the loading bays, while students in casual, body-fitting black and white shirts and trousers darted to and fro, their arms piled high with tools or raw materials. Even from the threshold, Northern could feel the heat radiating from within, a relentless pulse that seemed to reach out and challenge him. The faint scent of burning coal and hot iron filled his lungs as he stood there at the entrance, the symphony of clanging hammers and roaring fires threatening to rip his eardrums apart. Inside, the smithy spread wide and high like a cathedral of craftsmanship, aglow with the molten light of countless forges. Walls of blackened stone bore intricate carvings of legendary weapons and the forge legends themselves. Enormous chimneys ascended toward the dark heavens of the smithy. Inside, a labyrinth of workstations bustled with blacksmiths of all specialties, each immersed in their craft. Rows of anvils sat atop reinforced bases, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of labor. Bellows, powered by a blend of manual effort and hydraulic mechanisms, fed roaring flames that danced in the massive forges. A series of overhead cranes transported heavy ingots across the smithy, while grindstones and sharpening wheels spun at dizzying speeds under the steady hands of several students. In the corner, a pool of water and a barrel of oil served as quenching stations, their surfaces rippling with steam. Racks upon racks of tools, hammers, tongs, chisels, and punches lined the walls, each gleaming with the promise of precision. A specialized section featured magical runes and alchemical inscriptions, where enchanted alloys were shaped into artifacts of legend. Northern stood there, his head slowly twisting, enraptured by the uncanny beauty of this place. The smell of sweat, the intense heat, the busyness, the violent sound of metals, the coordination and discipline that existed in this building. They were all to his pleasing. He loved it and started to think. Learning blacksmithing might turn out to be the greatest decision I have ever made for myself. Northern's lips curled out a fulfilling smile. What a weird kid. Take off those fancy clothes and get working. Shampoo. Show him the drills. Northern did not have the opportunity to see the man for more than 1 second. His thick, monotonous voice carried his words too quickly, complementing his hasty demeanor. That 1 second, however, was enough for someone like Northern to make out his entire physique. This man had a muscular build, with broad shoulders and arms that seemed forged themselves. His red hair, styled in a rugged manner, complemented his confident and almost arrogant demeanor. A neatly trimmed beard framed his strong jawline, enhancing his aura of experience and authority. His outfit was practical yet iconic. A heavy brown leather apron adorned with reinforced metal plates, protecting him during his craft. Around his waist was a belt loaded with various blacksmithing tools, from hammers to tongs, each meticulously placed for easy access. His hands held a large, custom-designed hammer, the kind that could shape both steel and legends, to his right shoulder. His boots and bracers were sturdy, made for long hours of labor. Despite his rugged appearance, there was a spark of intelligence in his eyes, hinting at someone as thoughtful as he is skilled. Northern watched him stride purposefully out of the smithy and beyond. The person he had called Shampoo arrived in front of Northern. He was a lithe-looking guy with a slightly bent frame. Perhaps his posture over the years had contributed to that. His eyes examined Northern for a few seconds. Then Northern caught the flash of a villainous grin. He raised a brow. Huh? Did I imagine it? The boy adjusted his glasses and raised his chin, looking down on Northern even though they were around the same age. Today is your first day, right? Did you come with your work suits? Northern frowned. I don't even know what those are. Look at this runt. Talking back at your senior, foolish freshman. You will know your place soon. Northern tilted his head, innocently shocked. Heh! Chapter 629. First Day in School, Part 2. Of course, Northern had not expected that any being who set their eyes upon him should instantly know that he was the greatest of all time without having to be told. He was not famous at all. Perhaps only the survivors of the Dark Continent would know him quite well. But here in the vast Central Plains it was not so. Nor did he have any expectation in that regard. He had never even thought about it. However, there's this thing that humans have, it's called being honest to oneself. how a human of a certain class and caliber should be able to discern immediately when another is way beyond their level and humble themselves before inviting unnecessary insult. At least Northern felt like that was a thing. Or was it not? It had to be. Humans had this unparalleled ability granted to them by the nature of their fear and greed to recognize greatness when they saw one and act accordingly. What then could be the case with this strange boy, whom without a second look, anyone would deduce was the lowest level character in this workshop, a ground-level mob character? Frail figure uses glasses has a nickname, because there was no way in the 12 constellations that his name would be Shampoo. Northern bet that this name probably had something to do with his reproach to his first day in school, which turned out to be pretty embarrassing for him. And now he is trying to do the same thing to me, hoping that mine will overwrite his etchum. I see, that is why he is so blinded that he can't see it. He is desperate to be accepted and recognized even though weak and useless. A cold light glinted menacingly in Northern's eyes as he leered at the boy. How unlucky! What are you looking at? With the cold menace that Northern was emitting, even the strongest in the room would stutter, not Shampoo. Tell me, Shampoo, where do I get a change of clothes? The boy's face contorted darkly as his brows creased together. How dare you call me that? Know your place, you freshman. Northern flashed a grin. I was right. Almost immediately, a look of boredom climbed his face. But seriously, even his tone lacks the power needed for a successful intimidation. The boy sounded like a whelp trying to act tough. If I touch him, he could break all his bones before I get to inflict any satisfying pain. TSK, this has to be the peak of uselessness. Can't even be a sturdy punching bag. Northern visibly clicked his tongue in irritation. What is that look on your face? I am warning you. Where can I get extra clothes? The boy gritted his teeth, his eyes burning viciously, desperate for attention, which was the one thing he wasn't getting, even from the new boy. Northern wasn't even looking at him, and instead admired the smithy with a delighted smile plastered to his face. His entire demeanor conformed to convey that he perceived no significant being before him, and that only infuriated the boy more and more. But right now, Shampoo could not do anything. The number one rule of the workshop was that there was no fighting in the smithy. Otherwise, he would have bulldozed the newcomer and beaten him to a pulp. With his thin, frail body and sickly pale skin, Shampoo was sure he could make it in the Northern. Now was not the time, however. He would have to wait for lunch break. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at Northern once again, a vicious smirk marring his face. There are no extra clothes, so you will probably have to work bare-chested today. Northern sighed. I would prefer not to walk around with my chest flying around if possible. It's been a while since I've seen even my own chest. All right, Shampoo. Where is the changing room? The boy grimaced, biting his lips madly. But the look of indifference and uninterest hung lazily on Northern's face. I'll just find it myself then. He walked away, heading towards another student that was offloading his wagon, and asked the way to the changing room. The boy pointed towards an exit at the corner where they cool weapons. Northern naturally, with power and purpose, strutted towards the place, entering the exit that read changing room. All the while, Shampoo glared at Northern from the entrance where he stood. Then a nasty grin besmirched his face. Let's see how long you will last. The heat of this place is so strong that even the head forgemaster can't dare to work bare-chested. A fragile boy like you? I'm sure you will faint in barely 1 hour. The boy paused. What am I saying? 1 hour is too much. Let's give him 10 minutes. He returned to his station of work, offloading his own wagon of mineral ores. A few minutes later, the door to the changing room opened and someone majestically walked out, his pale skin almost glowing under the golden light that filtered through the high windows. The forgemaster dipping a newly forged sword into the water was the first to notice. He turned his head, eyes widening. What a body, he muttered, but loud enough for the other forgemaster that was just leaving to notice. The other one, a brunette-haired man with bushy beards and mustache, immediately ran close to Northern, running his hand across him to feel the texture of his skin. Northern frowned and took a step back. When he saw the man coming, he thought it was for something important, only to have him crazily touching him. "What is the meaning of this?" Northern demanded with an overwhelming authoritative tone. The Forge Master's eyes widened. "What amazing power! Boy, where are you from?" "You knew." Northern's frown slowly relaxed as he answered the man. "Yes, I am. Today is my first day." His eyes, however, stayed on the man, warning off any suspicious attempts with just the vicious light in their depth. "Come under my wing. I will teach you all that there is to learn about the art and act of forge." "Oi oi, look at you being a gobble master. Come work under you? Really?" The first Forge Master walked closer to them. He had dropped the sword he was cooling off. He reached Northern's side, brushing his little gray beards framing his golem-like face. "Boy, this guy's skill is second-rated. Come to me. I and the head Forge Master learned from the same master, the very best of the continent for 100 years before he went back to the constellations." At this point, every other student but sophomores and first-years who were busy working all paused, staring with a shocked expression. The smithy has 3 Forge Masters, whose skills are beyond legendary. Each of them has an immediate instructor who teaches the students directly. They are never known to express any interest in teaching anyone themselves. All they do is forge weapons or throw insults at anyone doing a crappy job. However, right now, 2 of the 3 Forge Masters are fighting over teaching a single boy. Shampoo, from where he was stationed, stared with wide and trembling eyes. What is going on? This is not how this was supposed to go. Unbeknownst to him, in his attempt to humiliate Northern, he had set the stage for him to shine. Chapter 630. The Legendary Blacksmith, Part 1. Even amongst the strength and energy-demanding non-combative courses, blacksmithing was different. The strength and power it demanded and built up in its practitioners placed them on a different stratum. Of course, in the end, talent comes to play a mammoth role in who ultimately is stronger. But no students overcome their physical limits more than blacksmiths. Blacksmithing was more than just swinging a hammer or enduring endless hours in the heat of a forge. It was an art form that demanded precision, endurance, and the perfect synergy of strength and control. To master it, one's body had to become a machine in itself, a finely tuned construct of muscle, bone, and resilience. Not just brute force, but tempered power, capable of explosive bursts without wasting an ounce of energy. This was why, as Northern stood amidst the roaring furnaces and glowing embers, the Forge Master's eyes swept over him with a peculiar intensity. They weren't admiring bulk or size. They were measuring potential. His frame, lean yet impossibly taut, radiated a strength that defied convention. His muscles, coiled and compact, didn't boast the oversized girth of most blacksmiths, but instead held a subtle sharpness, as though every fiber had been refined under pressure. It was a body built for efficiency, for speed and precision. Each movement he made seemed purposeful, the alignment of his form betraying a natural affinity for the rhythm of the forge. The Forge Masters exchanged knowing glances, recognizing something extraordinary. Northern's body could not be ordinary. It seemed like it had been forged deliberately by something, only that they couldn't tell what it was or how it had come to be. "You've got the makings of a blacksmith." One of them, the brunette-haired one, said finally, his voice gruff with admiration. "But not like the rest of us. Your muscles." His hand gestured vaguely, as if words failed him. "They're like tempered steel, stronger, sharper, different." The other Forge Master grinned, his eyes narrowing as he studied Northern's posture. "If you take up the craft, boy, your body'll change even more. Blacksmithing doesn't just demand strength, it reshapes you, refines you, but with a foundation like yours." He trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. "You won't just forge weapons. You'll forge yourself into something we've never seen before." Northern shifted under their scrutiny, feeling the weight of their words settle over him. He could sense it in their tone. Awe, curiosity, and maybe even a hint of envy. "Lean strength," one of them muttered almost to himself. "It's rare." Most of us had to build it the hard way, hammer blow by hammer blow, till we turned into walking anvils. But you, his gaze sharpened, you're already there. All you need is the forge to finish the job. Northern said nothing. He just stood there expressionless and thought for a moment. Could this be caused by the fact that void changed my body? Perhaps this may be the best time to test the limit of my body and forge it into something even more vile. Northern flashed a small smile and looked at both forgemasters. But there was a problem. These two wanted him to choose. No, he didn't want to. He stared at them intently, and at the same time, their gazes gripped their balls firmly, waiting for his decision. I'd like to learn from both of you and if possible the head forgemaster too. Ha! The gray-haired forgemaster growled, his eyes viciously burning with a faint pale light like fire that had been so much tempered and lost its orange light, transforming into something tender, insidious, and unhurriedly destructive. Boy, how dare you! You might have a gifted body, but your manners are a disappointment. Do you know who we are? We are the best in this entire continent. Weapons forged by Santhic here alone are sought and pursued by even the best of drifters out there. Not to speak of me, the great Iron Will. And then the head forgemaster, who hails from the divine lineage of Embervein. Hey, you bastard! Why do you speak of me like I'm some second-rated guy? The gray-bearded blacksmith groaned, glaring grudgingly at Iron Will. That's not the point here. The point is this boy certainly does not know our greatness and takes us for granted because of his gifted body. Isn't that nettling? HMMPPH humph, you are right. He certainly is full of pride. It won't do. Northern exhaled. In the end, your weapons are mundane weapons, and are outdone by item weapons harvested from slain monsters. According to my research, only one blacksmith has ever been able to repair items. Since then, no one has ever been able to. Doesn't that make all of you second-rated? You all stand here before me, chanting about how great you are, but you don't even measure up to one single person who has lived and carved a path that many should have surpassed a long time ago. Don't speak to me about manners and pride. A melancholic glint ignited in Northern's eyes, and he pointed to both of them. Certainly, neither of you deserves to be my teacher. The entire workshop fell dead silent again. The two of them gritted their teeth, their faces folding darkly as their fists clenched with veins almost popping out on their hands. How dare you talk down on the two continental greatest blacksmiths? Iron Will marched forward with palpable burning wrath. But he stopped midway as he saw someone enter the smithy. They each gulped as the person, steps as light as a feather, drew closer to Northern. The figure's crimson hair, tied back in a loose ponytail, flared like a banner of war with every subtle movement, the stray strands framing a face that spoke of both fire and mischief. A white headband cut across their brow, soaked with the sweat of their labor, yet unyielding, just like its wearer. Oh? So what are you implying? Freshman. Northern turned around as an accent that strangely reflected the nature of this environment reached his ears. Are you saying the forge-master's incompetent? Compared to the confidence that radiated from her like the heat of the forge, her voice was surprisingly warm like a crackling ember that had not gone out. Northern tilted his head slightly. If they feel that what they are right now is the best of them, then you took the word right out of my mouth. Northern's gaze did not falter, not even a tad bit. He glared into the woman's eyes with a cold, indifferent light burning in his deep gaze. Suddenly the girl beamed and began to cackle with a loud laughter that resonated across the gravely silent workshop. Her trembling shoulders slowly came to a stop as she finished laughing. And then she looked at the forge-masters who were standing behind Northern. See, this is what I'm always telling you. You guys are so incompetent it irks me. Certainly this boy sees it. Chapter 631. The Legendary Blacksmith, Part 2. Ah! Northern did not show it, but he was surprised as hell. This wasn't quite the response he was expecting from the lady standing before him. The way she commanded the air in the workshop with sharp wit and fiery spirit, that defiant but delighted expression on her face, informed Northern of the presence of an extraordinary person in this smithy. And his senses were piqued by her, which meant undoubtedly she was great too. But she was a female? However, Northern could not deny the palpable aura of fire that she emanated. Her outfit was a deliberate choice, practical but defiant. A cropped black top clung to her, revealing a toned midriff that hinted at countless hours of relentless work and unshakable discipline. Over her waist hung a smith's leather apron, heavy and adorned with intricate patterns, both armor for the forge and a badge of her mastery. Utility pouches lined the apron's belt, brimming with tools of her trade, their gleaming edges catching the light. Her gloves, thick and reinforced, were stained with soot, while her boots, solid and battle-scarred, seemed capable of withstanding both molten metal and the fury of a battlefield. But what truly demanded attention was the weapon she bore. A colossal hammer slung over her shoulder, its design equal parts artistry and devastation. The polished head gleamed with intricate carvings that seemed to whisper tales of its countless victories, whether on the anvil or against enemies. At her hip, a sword rested in its sheath, its simplicity betraying its purpose. A blade meant for killing, forged by none other than herself. Every tool and weapon strapped to her body spoke of precision, power, and pride, from the smaller hammers and tongs to the faint glint of a concealed knife. Yet it was not just her appearance that made her so imposing. It was her aura. That confidence continually radiated from her like the heat of a forge, an unspoken promise that she was a master of her domain, be it steel, flame, or battle. Her sharp smile, equal parts playful and dangerous, hinted at someone who relished a challenge. She was a creator of destruction, a crafter of chaos, and a living embodiment of the forge's fury. Northern's gaze lingered on her, and for a moment, he could almost hear the rhythmic clang of metal against metal, feel the blistering heat of the furnace that seemed to live within her. This was no ordinary blacksmith. This was someone who would shape not only steel but the destiny of those strong enough to wield her creations. And as her piercing gaze locked onto his, Northern had no doubt. This was a woman who could temper even him into something greater. A small grin formed on his face, but before he got the chance to say anything, the woman came close to him and casually threw her hand over his shoulders. Northern was irritated by it, aside from the fact that he hated being touched and the woman disgustingly smelled of sweat. He had never been this close to a lady before. He glared at the lady. You know, boy, you're saying that the great forge masters are incompetent. You've got to be able to back that with actions. Or are you all bark and no bite? Not waiting for his response, she continued. I'll tell you what. Pick up that hammer and prove me wrong. If you can shape a piece of metal without embarrassing yourself, maybe I'll consider teaching you a thing or two. A small frown creased Northern's brows. Isn't that unfair? I have never picked up a hammer before in my life. Then she pulled away from Northern and smacked his back playfully. But that smack caused Northern to stagger one step forward, almost bending. His eyes widened. What outrageous power! Her hands are so lean, and yet Northern didn't think he'd move an inch if any of these bulky-framed forgemasters hit him like that. And yet this lady... His eyes widened even more. Now he was beginning to understand what the forgemasters were saying about his body. Gifted body. Could it be that hers too? But Northern knew his body was not gifted. What he had here was the result of cruel tempering in the red mines, his first rift. He lost track of how long he wielded an axe, harvesting bloodthirsty crystals. This was the first and foundational basis for what his body was today. Then came the evolution of void and its effect on his seemingly fragile body. But still, Northern was impressed by the lady. Now, he wanted to learn from her at all costs. The lady faced the forgemasters with a stern look. Don't pout like sulking children. If you're the best on the continent, show him what that really means. Or are you scared this kid might actually be right? Santhic stepped forward, his face darkened by indignation. His massive arms, crossed over his barrel-like chest, flexed as he glared at the woman. Watch your tongue, Elina. You might be the prodigy of the forge, but don't forget your place here. You are only a student here. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Elina raised an eyebrow, her smirk unwavering. Yeah, a student that surpassed you all in her first year. She turned to Northern, touching his shoulders. Just like me 3 years ago, another prodigy of the forge has appeared, and it pains me to see you make the same mistake you made with me. Potentials like his are not meant to be coddled but refined. Obviously why he is displeased by you too. Northern remained silent, observing the exchange. The tension in the workshop was palpable. Every forge worker and student now frozen in place, eyes darting between Alina and the forge masters. Sparks from a nearby anvil hissed in the stillness, adding to the charged atmosphere. Santhic's eyes narrowed, and he jabbed a finger at Northern. Fine, let the boy prove himself. But when he fails, and he will fail, you'll admit that your so-called potential is nothing more than arrogance. And he will leave the forge. Alina chuckled and muttered, I can't believe I came here wanting to save whatever was left of you guys' honor. She gave Northern a sidelong glance. Guess that means the stage is yours, kid. Try not to embarrass me. Chapter 632. True Potential. Northern took a deep breath and stepped forward towards one of the forges in the workshop, the weight of all the eyes in the room pressing down on him. He glanced at the hammer lying on the anvil, a simple tool compared to the intricate one Alina carried. He wrapped his fingers around the handle and easily lifted it, turning to Elena, whose sharp gaze was fixed on him with a mixture of interest and curiosity. At the very least, would you tell me what to do? Northern spoke calmly, despite the tension hanging in the atmosphere. Everything about him was indifferently poised, unaffected by what was happening right now in the forge. Alina was silent for a couple of seconds, gazing deeply into Northern's eyes. Then she stepped forward, her tone uncharacteristically patient. See that lump of steel? You're gonna heat it until it glows, then shape it into a blade. Focus on the rhythm. A forge is like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. Let the fire guide you, and don't overthink it. Northern nodded, his chaos eyes flickering briefly as he analyzed the tools, the steel, and even the forge itself. The process seemed daunting, but he believed he could use his chaos eyes and knowledge about ligatures to see it through. He picked up the steel with a pair of tongs and thrust it into the roaring flames of the forge. The heat was blistering, and although he had gained some resistance to heat, cold, and other natural conditions, he could still feel a few pearls of sweat pooling on his brow a couple of minutes later. But he ignored the discomfort, focusing instead on the glowing metal as it began to soften. Alina stood behind him, her gaze following every one of his movements. What she was most interested in was seeing his striking power. The true potential of blacksmithing was observed in the striking power. Striking was not just hitting the steel. Alina had a special ability that allowed her to strike the steel according to the will of its owner. She believed that the strikes when molding the steel are what make the sword's will. And these strikes carry a proportion according to what the user wants the sword to be like, or her vision for the sword. A sword that would one day overcome several trials and save its master's life is known from the striking. A sword that would one day kill its master is known from the striking. A sword that will betray, a sword that will die prematurely. She believes it's all known from the striking, and this is what makes her a different breed of blacksmith. Because others consider this to be childish and an absolute waste of time. But her eyes slowly widened as she heard the sound of Northern's strike. Northern pulled the glowing steel from the forge, placed it on the anvil, and raised the hammer. The weight of it was reassuring in his hand, and he brought it down with a resounding clang that echoed through the workshop. The impact sent vibrations up his arm, and he realized just how precise he needed to be. His second strike was more deliberate, the third even more so. Slowly, the shapeless steel began to take form. The forge masters watched in silence, their skepticism giving way to quiet murmurs of surprise. Alina, meanwhile, had a nasty grin plastered to her face, her widened eyes trembling. How? That should be impossible for a first-timer. This rhythm, it's giving way to the accuracy of each form. He is not just striking. Alina observed him again. It's measured. It's definitely measured. His focus, the breathing space between each strike. He sees something, he is trying to form something specific. She was beyond amazed. This was the first time that she had seen anyone take a medicated approach to striking. Of course, every blacksmith, especially the forge master, understood it was a delicate process, but not with the measure and realistic approach she has for it. No, they don't have that. Northern handled things a bit differently from others, like he was seeing something. Well, he was seeing something. Even steels have ligatures. And his chaos eyes had evolved from being able to see ligatures and chaos constructs to being able to predict the best reforming structure for them. In all things, there exists a sequence of chaos structure that will bring about the best in that particular existence. For example, now, with chaos eyes, Northern could handle the ligature of a biotic existence, and his chaos eyes would predict the best merging sequence in which he could get a certain expected result. But not without a cost. Most especially with a biotic existence. Their natural ligatures are sequenced the way they are for a certain reason, and the cost for messing with it could be the biotic in existence. But for something like this steel, it was still possible. Steels are from mineral ores, which have ligatures and chaos constructs in a particular sequence. However, Northern saw that during heating, the sequences were being scattered and the ligatures were being weakened, reduced by the degree of heat to an almost inactive state. This state makes it dormant enough for striking to reform its sequence. This is why the sword begins to take shape. The only thing is, blacksmiths probably strike the steel according to what they were taught. But Northern could see how he needed to strike in order to produce the best sword. This was him rearranging the sequence of the ligatures, even down to the structure of each atomic level chaos construct. This was what gave birth to the measured, sweet, melodious rhythm of his strike. Everyone stood in the forge dazed. The sound of Northern hitting the strike was solemn, peaceful, and interesting. In fact, one guy had begun to tap his leg in the flow of the rhythm without even realizing, prompting a stern warning from his senior. All the while, Northern was absorbed in what he was doing, focused. His strikes became more confident, the rhythm of the hammer and the hiss of cooling steel melding into a strange harmony. It reminded him of battles, the flow of combat, the way each move had to be precise and purposeful. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, and by the time Northern stepped back, his arms ached, and his body was soaked with sweat. But on the anvil before him lay the rough shape of a blade, imperfect, but undeniably a blade. Elena stepped forward, picking up the still hot steel with a gloved hand. She inspected it closely, her expression unreadable. After a long moment, she turned to the burly forge master and raised an eyebrow. "Well?" she asked, her tone smug. "Humph." Santhic cleared his throat and looked away. "I guess he does have a thing or two in him, but he has a long way to go before creating a sword that will rival ours." She shifted her gaze to the second forge master, inquiring of him with her sharp eyes. "It's a pass. We will back off from him for now and let you teach him." Both of them shamefully walked away. "Go back to your stations. Stop staring. You goddamn wobbly heads," Iron Will yelled. Elena watched as they both threw shameful tantrums of losing. Then she took one last look at the blade and at Northern. "Mind if I have this?" Northern shrugged. "All right then, follow me. I will be teaching you all you need to become a master in this forge." Chapter 633. Unyielding Student of the Forge. The first day for Northern was exhausting. After putting both the forge masters and the unfortunate student in their place without trying, Northern was hurled away by Elena. And he did not like it. He spent the entire day striking a hammer on heated steel. Several of them, if he was not overstating it, perhaps close to 1,000. Which was insane for his first day. He had thought that the best thing that could have happened to him was finding a teacher like Elena who was a natural student. But several students had come around to offer their condolences to him instead, many even tapping his shoulders with a look of pity on their faces. This was before he received his first task from the forge prodigy. When he started work, that was when Northern understood what those looks were for. Elena was undoubtedly the most brilliant person in the forge, the best forge master, only that she was a student in her 4th and final year. But her work ethic made it impossible for anyone to want to be taught by her. The students said she usually demanded absurd and impossible things. Elina was a bit closed-minded and incapable of empathy. Every student that had temporarily come to learn from her, she had always put on a workload too high for them to catch up with, which had caused several students to resign from the blacksmithing course to go to other non-combative courses. When this became a very serious issue, with students in the forge being fewer than 10 and not enough workers to meet daily targets for weapon forging, the head forge master asked Elaine to stop taking students and instead focus on her own work. Of course, the forge prodigy had thrown a tantrum when this happened, but there was nothing she could do. This ultimately led to her presence in the forge being rare. Usually, she just showed up and struck a few metals. Northern was told that, in fact, the longest she had stayed in the forge in 3 months happened to be today, which was undoubtedly because of him. Every student had something to say about her while they were on break the first day and advised him to pull out of the course because Elina would ask him to accomplish things that were not even possible for her. Northern had seriously considered all their inputs, thought about it very well, and there was only one conclusion he could arrive at. They are weak. All of them. To Northern, it was simple. If there was anyone who couldn't meet Elina's target, it was because they lacked the will to push past their limits. In Northern's eyes, those who quit under pressure were the ones who failed themselves, not their teacher. She's not the problem, he muttered to himself. The problem is their lack of resolve. Northern wasn't blind to Elina's harsh methods, nor was he particularly fond of her domineering attitude. But there was something undeniable about her, a relentless drive that mirrored his own. If there was one thing Northern respected, it was someone who refused to settle for mediocrity, someone who pushed others to exceed what they thought possible. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his arms sore from the repetitive motion of hammering. His muscles screamed in protest, his body heavy with exhaustion, but his resolve only grew stronger. He remembered the mines, the suffocating heat, the constant hunger gnawing at his stomach, and the unyielding weight of the axe in his hands. Compared to that, this forge felt almost merciful. As the break ended, Northern watched Elina stride back into the forge. Her confidence was unwavering, her fiery spirit an almost tangible presence. She didn't even glance at the other students, her focus solely on him. "Well?" she said, her voice cutting through the clatter of the forge. "Still standing? Or should I find you a replacement?" Northern straightened his back, forcing the weariness from his face. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. Her sharp smile returned, one that bordered on amusement and approval. "Good. Let's see if you still feel that way by the end of today." She gestured for him to follow, leading him to a secluded corner of the forge where an anvil stood surrounded by half-finished weapons and scattered tools. Beside it was a smoldering furnace that radiated an oppressive heat. Elina grabbed a chunk of raw steel and tossed it onto the anvil. The clang echoed through the forge, drawing the attention of a few curious students. "Today's task is simple," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You're going to forge this into a blade. Not just any blade, but one that's sharp enough to slice through stone and durable enough to survive 100 battles. Northern raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to do that on my second day?" "No," she replied, folding her arms. "I expect you to try and fail, repeatedly, until you either get it right or collapse from exhaustion. Whichever comes first." The corners of his mouth twitched, a faint smile breaking through. "You really know how to motivate a guy." "I'm not here to coddle you," she shot back. "You wanted to learn from the best, didn't you? Then earn it. Every strike of the hammer, every bead of sweat. You either make them count or you waste my time. And trust me, I don't take kindly to having my time wasted." Northern said nothing, his focus shifting to the raw steel on the anvil. He picked up the hammer, its weight a familiar strain on his arms. There was something insane about Northern's body, something he had been observing since the first time he started lifting the hammer. The first day was exhaustive. When he got home, he fell on his bed and slept off, so much that he missed dinner. Fortunately for him, they served breakfast and he had something in his stomach before reporting the second day. The second day it was strenuous but not like the first day. It was slow, very slow, but Northern could feel his body changing. It was like his entire muscles were reforming to better suit his actions in order to not just reduce exhaustion, but also produce the maximum ratio of output. He wasn't sure at first, but he wanted to confirm it as he continued to use the hammer. With the thought in mind, Northern placed the steel into the furnace, the flames licking at its surface until it glowed a fierce orange. The heat was intense, the kind that could make lesser men falter, but Northern's grip only tightened. As he pulled the steel from the furnace and placed it on the anvil, Elina watched him with a critical eye. "Remember," she said, her tone softer but no less firm, "a blade is more than just steel. It's an extension of its maker. If you don't put your soul into it, it's nothing more than a useless hunk of metal." Northern didn't respond immediately. Her words lingered in his mind as he raised the hammer, the weight settling comfortably in his hand. Put my soul into it? The idea wasn't foreign to him. It was how he had survived so far, pouring every ounce of himself into whatever challenge lay before him. The first strike landed with a sharp, echoing clang that silenced the forge for a brief moment. The sound reverberated through the room, and the students who had been snickering or whispering behind his back now turned their attention toward him. Northern didn't care about their stares. He focused entirely on the steel in front of him, watching it compress and shift under the force of his hammer. Sparks flew in chaotic arcs, illuminating the sweat glistening on his forehead. Strike after strike, he fell into a rhythm. Each swing of the hammer was deliberate, a controlled release of power that steadily molded the raw steel into a semblance of a blade. Elina stood nearby, observing with her arms crossed. She offered no praise, no words of encouragement, just a silent, scrutinizing presence. It would have been unnerving to most, but Northern welcomed it. Her watchful gaze felt like a challenge, and he thrived under the weight of it. By the time midday came, his muscles were burning again, but there was something exhilarating about the process. As the students took their break, Elina called out to him. "You're not stopping, are you?" Northern wiped his brow, his grin defiant. "Not until this blade's done." She nodded approvingly but didn't let it show on her face. "Then keep going, but don't get complacent. The steel won't forgive your mistakes." With that, she walked off, leaving Northern alone with the blade that was beginning to take shape. He wasn't a perfectionist, but he knew there was no room for error here. This was probably Elina's way of testing him, not his skill but his resolve. As the hours dragged on, Northern's hands began to blister, but the blisters would heal and then form again and heal. The hammer felt heavier with each swing. His body screamed for rest, but his mind stayed sharp. And as he grew tired, even without Chaos Eyes, he could see it, the faint outline of what the blade could become if he just pushed a little harder. By the time Elina returned, the day star was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forge. Northern stood by the anvil, the crude blade cooling in a basin of water. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Elina picked it up, examining it under the fading light. "It's rough," she said bluntly, "but it's not bad for a beginner." "Thanks," Northern replied, his voice hoarse but steady. She set the blade down, her expression unreadable. "Don't take this as praise. You've still got a long way to go before I'd consider you even remotely competent. But," she paused, almost as if reluctant to admit it, "you didn't quit. That's more than I can say for most." Northern smirked, leaning on the anvil. "What can I say? I'm not like most." She gave a small snort, shaking her head. "We'll see if you can still say that after tomorrow. Same time, same place. And bring your A game or I'll know." As she walked away, Northern allowed himself a moment to breathe. His arms were trembling, his body on the verge of collapse, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He looked at the crude blade he had forged, a small sense of pride welling up inside him. It wasn't perfect, but neither was he. Yet, for now it was enough. Tomorrow he'd do better, and then he couldn't wait to see his progress after 1 year. Chapter 634. Son of the Forge. The first and second days were a mercy to Northern's routine for the next few weeks. The sad and painful part was that it left him having no time for other things. It was difficult and enjoyable. While he had a difficult, experimental, and practical learning session with Alina during school hours, he had sword training sessions with Byran in the evening. Not only was Byran willing to pass his sword styles to Northern, he was also overeager to help Northern brush up his own chaos sword art. This caused Northern to usually show up to the forge several days tired, relying on his circulation of essence to at least save him from the brink of collapsing. He had no time at all for anything and usually gave himself to blacksmithing and sword training. He was, at the very least, happy that he was learning both at the same time. It was helpful. Alina's teachings and succulent explanations about weapons, armors, and all things that are forgeable, but most especially weapons, helped Northern during sword training. They improved his understanding of the sword and the twin-bladed staff. For example, understanding the balance of weight and the distribution of force in a weapon had drastically improved Northern's technique. Alina's relentless lessons on the intricacies of forging, how a blade's curve affected its cutting power, how the density of metal influenced its durability, translated directly into his movements during combat. Byran noticed the change almost immediately. "Master, you're starting to move like your weapon is an extension of yourself," Byran remarked during one evening training session, his voice tinged with approval. "That's the hallmark of a true swordsman." Northern, sweat dripping down his face, nodded as he adjusted his grip on his twin-bladed staff. "It's not just the weapon," he said between heavy breaths. "It's the craft. Knowing how it's made. It changes how you see it." Byran gave a faint smile, his beautiful eyes radiating with self-pride. "Master, you are incredibly intelligent. A genius. No one will be able to match your skill both in sword and blacksmithing in the next 2 years." "Thank you," Northern replied with a smile. Of all his summons, Byran was the one that had managed to get closer to him. The bastard sometimes would even show up unannounced, casually relaxing in Northern's room, saying the limitless void was too crowded, he needed fresh air. Northern, after Byran began to move like that, noticed changes in other summons also. For example, Black Mamba for some reason now looks at him with jitters. Northern also didn't know how, but 5 monsters have become spectras and are on their way to becoming void summons. All on their own. He was yet to figure out the principality that worked this phenomenon, nor did he have so much time on his hands to find out. The weeks blurred together into a grueling routine. Every morning began in the forge, where Alina pushed him to his limits, assigning him increasingly complex tasks that required both physical endurance and mental precision. If he wasn't forging a blade, he was repairing a damaged suit of armor. If he wasn't working with steel, he was experimenting with rare and difficult materials from rifts that required intense focus to manipulate. By the time the day ended, his arms felt like lead, his fingers blistered and raw. With how he felt his body adapting to the change, it was always like the challenge grew the next day, causing an even more daunting task of adaptation for his body. There was no rest. Northern would push himself even harder, refining his swordsmanship until his body felt like it might collapse under the weight of his efforts. Despite the exhaustion, Northern could feel himself growing. His body was adapting to the relentless strain, his muscles harder and more precise, his movements more fluid. More importantly, his mind was sharpening. He began to see patterns in both forging and combat, connections that others might overlook. A weapon wasn't just a tool. It was an expression of its wielder's intent, a physical manifestation of their soul. One night, as he collapsed onto his bed, his body aching and his mind buzzing with fatigue, Northern allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought of the past and how far he had come. This caused him to reminisce about certain people, some he hated, some he missed. "All right," Master Annette said she was coming to the academy. "I wonder if she's here too. She's not a master anymore either." Northern wondered for a moment how shocked she would be to find out that he was now a sage. Now, as he stared up at the ceiling, the faint glow of dual moonlights filtering through his window, Northern stared at the ceiling till sleep hurled him away. The next day, Alina seemed to notice the shift in him. "You're forging faster," she said, her tone as sharp as ever but with a hint of curiosity. "And with more precision." What changed? Northern shrugged, hammering down on a glowing blade with practiced ease. I stopped thinking about it as work, he said simply. All of this, it's just part of who I am now. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't press the matter. Instead, she nodded, almost imperceptibly. Good. Then you're ready for your next challenge. She placed a small chunk of shimmering metal on the anvil. It was unlike anything Northern had worked with before, its surface shifting like liquid even as it held its solid form. This, Elina said, her voice serious, is Etherium. It's one of the rarest metals in existence. Gotten from a Tier 5 rift and used only in the creation of weapons for the most elite drifters, even masters can't handle its power. Forging it requires absolute focus and precision. One mistake, and it's ruined. Northern stared at the metal, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. He could feel the energy radiating off of it, like a heartbeat in his hands. What do you want me to make? He asked, his voice steady despite the weight of her request. A weapon worthy of your potential, she replied, stepping back to give him space. Let's see if you can rise to the occasion. The forge grew quiet as the other students watched, their usual gossip and laughter fading into silence. All eyes were on Northern as he picked up the Etherium, his expression unreadable. He didn't care about their stares or their whispered doubts. For him, this wasn't about proving them wrong. It wasn't even about proving Elina right. He was about to start the process when a shrouding presence entered into the workshop. Northern recognized him immediately. Chapter 635, The Man Who Sold Us Out. The mineral ore slowly slipped off Northern's hands as he turned and caught a glance of the man who entered the smithy. His eyes widened and trembled. Elina, as she saw this, had immediately raised her voice. Hey! Only for her to stop as she beheld Northern's countenance. She felt the fiery flames of her soul flicker and tousle to hide away from the ominous light faintly radiating in his eyes. Elina had only felt this way once in her entire life. She prided herself on her edge-sharp instincts and ability to sense danger faster and deeper than every other drifter, even the elites. Right now, she was utterly confused and devastated at what she was feeling. The level of danger she perceived from Northern made her freeze in place, cold sweat running down her back. But nothing devastated her more than the thought that throughout the past 3 weeks he had been working in the forge. She had never once perceived him to be dangerous at all. Not even slightly once. Northern, oblivious of the air change around him, carefully watched as the man spoke to Santhic at the entrance of the forge. The man had a stoic face just like then. There was nothing extraordinary about his entire persona. In fact, he was too ordinary. His body formation was something that could have been forged only by years of painful hard work. A total mob that struggled to find his place in a luxurious society but, however, due to his hard-working virtue and determination, had still managed to fit in somewhere. Now that Northern observed him, he couldn't help but feel, there's hell in no way he wouldn't have known about it. Northern growled internally. Eventually, the man finished discussing with Santhic and turned away. As he stepped outside, Northern followed. I'm sorry, Master. I'll be back in a minute, Northern said, not caring to check if the message was well received, and vanished. He literally vanished. Elina was right behind him, watching him with caution, widening her eyes. And all of a sudden, before her very sharp eyes, he was no more. No one in that workshop had eyes fast enough to have followed Northern's movement. Most of them didn't even know that he had gone. Only those closer to his area of the forge suddenly saw him vanish. But Northern did not disappear. He just ran. The past few weeks had been tempering his body ferociously. His reforming muscles were now even affecting his movements, which was a main coordination of the only speed talent Northern had. The man who had come out of the forge was casually walking behind 2 tall buildings. He was a clerk delivering messages to the non-combative school, since they were so far away, and was going to the next building, which was the artificing workshop. However, he suddenly stopped as he felt something tingle behind his neck. He was about to turn his neck to look back when his eyes suddenly widened. An overwhelming pressure fell on him. It was so vivid that he felt his heart immediately begin to squeeze. Following the intense pressure that fell on the atmosphere was a swift change in the scenery which he had no idea when it happened. The man suddenly felt like he had lost track of time. Where was I going? Where was I coming from? What is this place? A cold, dark, and sinister hall stretched out before his eyes. Colossal pillars that made him feel like an ant flanked his right and left. The room was so enormous. He tried to move only to discover that he was more affected than he thought he was. His legs were frozen, and even though he was standing, he couldn't feel them again. Come on! Frustration gnawing at his throat. He punched his thighs, his crumpled face begging for them to obey him. But even his strong legs recognized the might of whom they stood before. A sound, like the powerful blow of a swift storm, suddenly tore through the echoing silence of the hall, prompting the man to raise his head. Before him, bluish-black flames danced sinisterly, like dark and vicious cannibals dancing around a bonfire as they celebrated their kill. The ominous flames cast down the silhouette of a figure atop a tall whitish throne behind them. From behind the flames, the eyes of the figure gleamed with a wicked light. Faint tendrils of darkness swirled around him like a restless storm. The air seemed to bend under the weight of his presence. The pressure was so immense that the man fell to his knees without realizing it. Please, I have no idea what went wrong, or how I got here. I didn't mean to intrude on you, sir. He did not know what he was doing, but his primitive sense could tell immediately. The distance of power between him and the creature behind those flames was even larger than the distance between the sky and the ground. It was in his best interest that he acted as meek as possible and found whatever way he could to get out of this situation alive. You have no idea what you did wrong? Northern's voice resonated throughout the hall, echoing like sparkling jewels jingling across the neck of an ethereal beauty. The man suddenly threw his face left as he belatedly felt something. A pale, black-haired boy was standing next to him with a small but certainly vicious smile on his lips. The boy shrugged with his head. You probably had no idea what you were doing when you willfully agreed to send those students to their deaths 2 years ago. Northern's eyes burned even more wickedly. He glared at the man, taking one slow step after the other as he said, I bet you had a beautiful night. You were paid handsomely for fulfilling your quota of the job, right? You led 100 of students to their ruin, with no remorse, deceived and sent us to die. Northern paused, his eyes taking an interesting look into the depth of the man's soul, a distorted expression climbing his face. Did it feel good? You grinned at the thought of it, didn't you? You bastard. The man, Holland, knelt there, his eyes trembling, and soul broken. Chapter 636. The Audacity, Part 1. Holland, the moment Northern started speaking, dropped his shoulders. The color on his face, even though paled by fear before, totally dried out now. His eyes were almost glassy. His entire demeanor fell and shattered as Northern continued to press his words. It did not break him. The man was already broken. Northern's words just reminded him of his sin, thus causing his sufferings to resurface. The guilt and pain he had carried so much that they had drawn out the life in him became apparent. However, none of that concerned Northern. He spared not even a glance of sympathy to Holland, despite the sorrow on his face being apparent. You think looking like that would make me pity you even a bit? Holland slowly moved. He bent his head to the ground, kowtowing before Northern. I don't know you in particular. His voice was haggard and rough. But judging by what you are saying, you are part of the students from almost 2 years ago. If you will let me, I can tell you the same thing that I said to the others that approached me when they entered the academy. Northern narrowed his eyes. Others came. Of course they would have. His face was, after all, the last face they saw before they all found themselves in the land of death. Many of them down the line would have heard that this was the master plan of the former academy principal Ruffsberg. But many more would have ingrained the last face they saw as the object of their wrath and vengeance. So, yes, they probably would have done anything to get to him. Only the academy wasn't an easy place to enter. And so far, only Annette did Northern know was coming to the academy. He also guessed that Vita might follow or better still go home. Annette was not a student. She wouldn't have approached the officer, not when she knew what was truly at play or at the very least had a guess. Northern guessed Vita, although he felt like approaching the man with burning rage didn't quite fit what he knew of her so far. More so, the man had said the others, which meant they were more than just one. Undoubtedly, survivors of the Dark Continent had come to Nestle here either as instructors or students. The trace of a ghostly smile left Northern's lips. Did they have the same thought as me? They wanted to wait where Ruffsburg was close so that when he came around they'd be the first to kill him. Their rage was burning that fiercely? Northern was impressed. But they were being reckless. If Ruffsburg came out of his solitary training, he'd probably be coming out as a luminary. That was not the only thing. He wasn't sure what image the others had when they said Ruffsburg was training to become a luminary. But Northern was aware that Ruffsburg manifested rifts somehow to use them as training grounds, endlessly killing strong monsters to temper his soul and grow. The soul core requirements to graduate to a luminary must have been enormous if he had to resort to such a dangerous deed. He probably was not just sitting around absorbing thousands of cores somewhere but was constantly engaged in slaying monsters of higher ranks, perhaps Belial? Or even stronger. Northern couldn't guess. However, he was sure that aside from being a luminary, Ruffsburg would be blessed with so many items that he could utilize to his own gain and also an insurmountable experience of battle. And who knows what new powers being a luminary held. This was the time to be very careful. Northern felt he could handle it, but these guys? He wasn't so sure about. Anyways, it was none of his business. They had barely walked out of death alive. If they felt the next thing to do was walking into another one, they were free to. Northern took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes narrowing further as he towered over Alan's trembling form. His voice cut through the tense air like a blade, devoid of mercy. "Speak. I was asked to do this by Instructor Bradley. We are only bottom feeders in the academy. People like us have no choice but to do as we are told. You can kill me if it will appease your anger. I will gladly die at your hands, but it will spell bad news for you. An officer dying in the academy would not go unnoticed. This will spell trouble before even the former headmaster comes around and things get into the clear." He was right. Within the walls of the academy, one could not just kill anyone. If that were to happen, the entire academy would go up in flames. It was only a matter of time before the culprit was found. And what would happen then? What were his chances against an entire academy? He shouldn't be reckless and just take things with measured calculations. However, an unsettling sinister grin charred Northern's face. It made Alan suddenly very uneasy. He couldn't tell what Northern was thinking. "Get up!" Northern's voice curtly rang in the hall. "Don't let me repeat myself a second time." "Ah, thank you, sir. Thank you." Alan quickly and staggeredly rose to his feet. His legs trembled slightly, but he endured. The pressure was still faintly hanging in the atmosphere like a violent storm caged against the high ceiling by an unseen force. Northern's eyes glowed as he took a peek into the man's soul, observing the information of his talent. He spat with disdain. "Useless." He fixed his eyes on the man, his tone deadpanned as he said, "I'll give you a chance to fight for your life." "Ha!" Alan wasn't sure what he had just heard. He just told Northern what killing him could cause. Not that he hated dying, but it would create a lot of trouble for Northern, and it was a trouble that was not worth it. At least until Ruffsburg came, killing him could turn the entire academy against them. And it was a reasonable thing that all of them had no choice against. What was wrong with this dude? Why was he asking him to fight for his life? As if on cue, Northern's cold voice penetrated the dreadful atmosphere, intangibly slicing his entirety in half. "You said you will gladly die by my hands. Wield your blade and let me see a wide smile on your lips. Only one of us will leave here today." Chapter 637. The Audacity, Part 2. Northern wove from the shimmers of dark sparks a long, slightly curved blade. The blade crackled with lightning, as if resonating with the serene viciousness that glowed in his eyes. When he approached Alan, he had not at all thought about killing the officer. Northern was not thoughtless and pushed by emotions, at least not anymore. He had a reason for bringing Olland here, and that reason was none other than to manipulate the officer with fear, causing him to spill out whatever secret he held. However, as Olland spoke, Northern realized he was a cannon fodder that was being used. If he wanted to get substantial information, he needed to reach this instructor Bradley person. And that should have concluded his interrogation with Olland. However, one single thing happened that pissed Northern off. While Olland spouted things like he didn't care about dying, although reasonable and logical, he still used the rules of the Academy as regards harm and murder not taken lightly as a protection of his own life. He was contradicting himself. Someone that felt incredibly sorry and devastated by what he had done but still had the audacity to cling to his life. This dude might have been sorry, or at least deceived himself well enough that he was, or maybe was actually at a point of genuine remorse. But clearly, he had lived too full a life to remember the pain as it had first happened. Because if he did, he'd be dead already. It was not up to him to announce the fact that the Academy would hunt down his killer. To Northern it was endearing and hypocritical. What did he take me for? Had been the thought that crossed Northern's mind as he spoke, using the collective mass of the Academy to threaten him. You don't talk to a man that defeated death not once but on several occasions like that. You don't talk to a master of void and chaos like that, having to face the wrath of the Academy on his own. He was not about to turn into a cold-blooded mass slaughterer. But if he did, who would hold him? Nobody. Who would dare to fight him? Maybe someone, but who could defeat him? Nobody. Olland's undoing of himself was daring to use that failsafe against Northern. If he had just begged for his life like the cannon fodder that he was, perhaps Northern would have let him leave. But right now, he disgusted Northern down to the very core. All Northern could see of the officer was a man that had happened to get a lavish life, maybe at first unable to enjoy the life out of guilt for what he had done. However, time had passed. He had gotten addicted to the new life and now had things to hold on to, that he would dare throw his failsafe in everyone's faces. What are you doing? I will cut you even if you don't summon your weapon. Northern's voice dripped with dire seriousness, devoid of any emotion. Not even anger rang in his tone. What are you doing? This is a mistake. The Academy will turn against you. Northern tilted his head. The next moment he was gone, with a blast of wind. Olland's eyes widened, his hands extending quickly, manifesting white sparks as his weapon broke beyond the boundary of his soul, into reality. However, it was too late. He watched as his hand rolled into the air. Northern's odachi had arched upward with a spray of blood curving in the air. The blade screeched melancholically with a cold light as it easily sliced through his shoulders like wind cutting water. Immediately, an insurmountable amount of pain stung Olland's shoulders, blood gushing out like the force of water breaking through a rock. His vision dimmed and grew dizzy as he let out a guttural scream, grabbing the point of amputation to stop the bleeding. Blood sprayed violently through his fingers despite his rugged attempt. He staggered forward, breaking to a knee. His face was distorted, eyes widened with lines of despair spreading across his face. Northern stood before him, casting a cold, indifferent gaze down on his wretched state. What? I gave you a chance to draw your sword, but you hesitated. The texture of Northern's tone was dark, like the low growl of a devil. You have your legs and one hand and even your head. In the Dark Continent, many of us don't get to keep that much should we hesitate. Northern swung stainless sideways, cleanly splashing away the smudge of blood on its steel. Then he rested the blade upon his shoulders, its sharp edge glistening wickedly beneath the bluish light of the hall's ceiling. A ghastly light reflected on Northern's face as he bore down on him again. Seeing the look on Northern, the officer seemed to finally realize today was the day his luck ran out. His eyes widened impossibly. Misery clutched his soul. Trembling, Olland scrambled to the ground, groveling at Northern's feet. Please, please, I beg you don't kill me. I knew nothing about this. I was just obeying a command. All I did was do as I was told. I swear, he cried out, groaning painfully. This is quite simple. Northern deadpanned. You don't want me to kill you, stand up and kill me. I gave you a fair chance, didn't I? Eyes widened. Aland paused for a moment, seriously considering. Would he really have a chance at crossing swords with an impossible existence such as this? He looked like a child. He should still be able to fend off some attacks and run away, right? At the very least, get out of this hall, perhaps then the illusion will break, or at least he could get enough time to send help. There were unlimited possibilities. All he had to do was try. He had to live no matter what. He was sorry, incredibly sorry, but he had come too far to give up now. He was a clerk now. It was only a matter of time before he would be recommended for a junior instructor. He might have lost an arm, but he can still fight for his life and retain what's left of it. No, he couldn't die now. All the while Northern watched with a crooked smile as the light of hope ignited in the depth of the man's soul. Chapter 638. 2 Chances. Northern smiled peacefully as he watched Alan struggle to his feet. He was incredibly patient with the officer, waiting without complaint until he had finished materializing a long, clean silver blade with cross guards that stood out because of their length. The blade looked like a claymore but did not have the same length. Northern would fit it into something like a longsword at best. Although he worried for Aland a couple of minutes ago, the officer was summoning with his right hand, which had now been lost. As a result, the summoning was a failure. Now, he had to fight with his left and only remaining hand. Northern worried if he'd be able to give his best in such a state. Should I not have gone for the left instead? Aland held his sword to the front of his face, observing the spark in Northern's eyes, his voice cautiously approaching. Please, I will do anything. I have been dying to fight someone from the Central Plains. Northern interrupted, without a care in the world for what the officer wanted to pitch to him. I have had to grow my skill in the harshness of battles. It has always left me wondering how I will fare with someone that is well taught and has the basics right. Although now, I too have an outstanding teacher. Northern was looking at the stainless as he spoke. With his last word, he raised his head and looked Aland in the eye. Although you won't measure up, besides being just a nomad, you have a D-class talent. That is beyond disappointing. You are a failure. Northern's words were laced with so much toxicity that Aland couldn't suppress the boiling rage that rose in his chest. A child was calling him a failure? What did this one know about failures? Did he even know how hard it was to get access to a rift? Some say joining a citadel would provide a solution, but citadels are incredibly picky. Nobody wants a D-class talent. And even if he should join a public citadel, it is the same thing. The same routine of drifters are chosen over and over to challenge rifts. The best people like him served as cleanup. That was why he quit his job to come work as a gateman and have a better shot at success. He had trained all his life to become stronger, to defy the fate that got dictated and imposed upon him the day he got awakened. And he had improved. If only people would actually give him a chance to prove that to them, if only they would give him a chance to display his skills and experience. He had done so much work, sacrificed so much to get to this stage of his life where he was earning enough to take care of his family and slowly rising to a position where he would finally be recognized for what he can do. And here comes a child saying he is a failure? The gutter act of it made Alan's soul ignite with a ferocious flame, temporarily forgetting his state. Of course, he did not dare forget the difference in power. This was why he only could have thought all these and not speak it. But a look of defiance was slowly rising on his face. It made Northern interestingly raise a corner of his lips. Oh, I like the look on your face. Want to prove me wrong? Be my guest. Northern removed Stainless from his shoulders, skillfully twirling the sword with one hand before extending it horizontally. The past few weeks have only been the beginning of so much that Northern had to learn under Byran. But that beginning had yielded such mountainous results that Northern didn't mind throwing a swing or two. He was almost exhilarated even, but controlled himself not to be. This was the death of a person. He felt he shouldn't be grinning at the thought of slashing a man. This, at least, could help him convince himself he was not insane, not yet. So, Mr. D-Class Talent, since I attacked first before, I'll give you 2 open chances to attack. I won't even fend off your attacks. Hit me with the best you've got, So that will make us even. Northern smiled angelically, actually faintly devilishly. It was hard and easy to tell somehow. Since you've lost a limb, it is only right that I am fair, right? Aland could not understand who this maniacal boy was. Now that he thought about it, all the people that came back from the Dark Continent and had assaulted him seemed to have one or two screws loose in their head. But this boy was insane. He had gone totally mad. How can anyone be so chilly about slicing off an Academy worker's arm, knowing very well that the Academy will catch wind of it, inspect this matter, and it was only a matter of time before they found out. Are you not going to come at me? Or do you want to lose your second hand? The hall resounded with a stern tone. Aland gritted his teeth. His heart raced, but it wasn't fear that drove it. It was rage. Rage at the system that had failed him, at the talent that had shackled him, and now at this boy who dared mock his life's struggles. 2 chances. 2. That was all the boy had granted him. Not out of fairness or mercy, but as a taunt. A final humiliation before he delivered the killing blow. The silver blade trembled in his left hand. Whether from exhaustion or fury, Aland couldn't tell anymore. He adjusted his stance, drawing on every ounce of training, every memory of drills and failures, and every bitter moment he'd swallowed through the years. His foot shifted slightly, and the weight of his body transferred, his sword arm following with precision. The first strike came like lightning, a clean horizontal slash aimed at Northern's neck, direct, ruthless, efficient. Aland's muscles coiled and released with the ferocity of someone who had nothing left to lose. Northern didn't flinch. With an almost dismissive look, Northern stopped the lightning-fast strike with 2 fingers, which Aland didn't see move at all. His eyes never left Aland. A flicker of something almost like disappointment passed through them. Too slow. The words stabbed deeper than the blade ever could. Aland didn't wait. He pivoted instantly, his stance shifting into a fluid arc, as he redirected the momentum of the swing into an upward strike aimed at Northern's ribs. This time, Aland was sure it was a hit, only to see his sword stop barely a dot away from Northern's side. No matter the force he applied to push it further, the sword penetrated no further, stopped by an invisible wall. Is that really all? Northern asked, his voice soft but cutting. He still hadn't raised his sword, hadn't even considered defending himself. Aland stumbled back, his chest heaving. The fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by the creeping shadow of despair. 2 chances gone. Northern slowly moved his sword. I guess it's my turn, eh? Chapter 639. His might plunders the heavens. Northern dashed at the officer, hurling his sword from below in a brutal arc across his torso. But Aland was sharper-witted than he seemed, quickly raising his blade with a hastened backward step. Not only did he manage to block Northern's attack, but he also reduced the impact of its force on his entire form. However, that was just the best of what he could get from this battle. Northern's movement became even more impossibly fast, throwing his hand almost from every angle. His sword was fast, blurring and bleeding into a succession of strikes with an irregular and ugly pattern. Aland tried his best. Despite being equipped with a second-choice hand, he was still able to at least stop the strike from severing a major part of his body again. However, shallow lines of blood flashed on his skin as sparks of both swords flew. Northern was calmly swinging his sword. The speed of his hand was unfair. He stood rigid, not using a flow of footwork to deal with the officer. One hand hung behind his back while the other handled the odachi. Northern was giving him a handicap only because he thought it fair to do so. Aland had lost one hand. If he wanted to have a chance at this battle, it was only required that he too fought with one hand. I'm giving all I have to you because I want you to shock me. You looked like I was hating on you before, like I knew nothing about you. Here I am giving you one more chance to prove yourself. Although it really won't matter, I think you will die nonetheless. Aland did not have the leeway like Northern. If he dared to respond to the boy's speech, he would have to divide his attention, and that would be very detrimental for him. Instead, he gritted his teeth and continued to parry Northern's attacks, sometimes redirecting their force to the side or away from his body. The air would shudder every time Aland maneuvered Northern's strikes. Before getting a breathing chance, Northern's blade would already be tracing an impossible arc back his way. Northern's blade arced downward like a lightning strike, raw and unrelenting. Aland twisted his torso, narrowly dodging the cut as it shaved a strand of hair from his temple. He pivoted on his back foot, thrusting his sword toward Northern's exposed ribs. But Stainless smacked away the officer's long sword with a splatter of sparks. Northern's lips curled into a smirk. "Better," he murmured. In an instant, Northern's blade shifted trajectories, the odachi snapping upward in a vicious uppercut. Aland barely managed to angle his weapon in time, sparks erupting as steel met steel. The impact forced him a step back, his heels skidding on smooth ground. The officer frowned darkly and immediately gathered himself, propelling himself towards Northern. Stainless bit into his right chest, but almost immediately the officer grabbed the blade and released a jolt of electricity that traveled across the sword quickly. Northern was joggled by a short but intense jolt of shock that almost made him stunned. In that brief 1 second, Aland tore himself away from Northern's sword and closed the distance with a reckless charge. His blade aimed squarely for Northern's throat. But Northern had already recovered, his chaos eyes flashing briefly as he tilted his head with uncanny precision. Aland's sword cleaved through empty air, close enough to stir Northern's hair but far enough to leave the officer overextended. "You're trying," Northern said coolly, his voice carrying a faint undertone of mockery. "But not enough." Before Aland could fully retract his blade, Northern's odachi came down again, a crushing arc of cold steel and unyielding force. Aland managed to bring his weapon up in defense, the clash of their swords echoing like thunder in the hall. The force sent Aland reeling, his boots sliding backward. His teeth clenched as he felt his wrist strain under the pressure, the sharp bite of pain threatening to weaken his grip. Northern stepped forward with a deliberate calm, his blade weaving intricate, deadly patterns in the air. Each swing of Stainless felt like an extension of Northern's intent, a storm given form, chaotic yet precise. Aland's breathing was ragged now, his muscles burning with the effort to stay alive. Each parry came slower, each deflection sloppier. The officer's body screamed for rest, but his mind refused to yield. Northern tilted his head as if reading his opponent's thoughts. "Impressive," he said. "You managed to give me a little shock with your so-called lightning talent, but how long before you are able to build up another one that would probably just keep me away from you for half a second?" Aland was devastated and despairing, but Northern did not give him room to grieve. His talent worked in such a way that he had to build up lightning if he wanted to use it as an offense. Usually, its effect would stun his opponent right away, but it had little to no effect on Northern. And the second ability he used at the beginning of their battle gave him a head start on speed, which was useless considering the insane amount of speed Northern matched him with. Now he was realizing, in fact, that what Northern had blurted out was not out of arrogance but true insight. A lot of thoughts ran across his mind, but in between having to parry Northern's brutal attacks with his life on the line and looking for a slight moment of counterattack, there was no room to ponder on his thoughts. The next strategy he was considering was to run. "You're wasting energy," Northern said, spinning Stainless in his hand. "You won't win this way. Why don't you put your mind into it? Try to think outside the box for the best possible way to defeat me." Aland's eyes narrowed, his mind racing as he desperately searched for a weakness. Northern's technique was flawless, his movements unreadable. But there was one thing Aland knew: no one was invincible. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, with the propulsion of lightning speed he received from his talent, Aland feinted a strike toward Northern's head. As expected, Northern's blade shot up to intercept, the motion so fast it was nearly invisible. But this time Aland was ready. Twisting his body at the last moment, he dropped low and swung his blade upward, aiming for Northern's left side. For a fraction of a second, it seemed as though he might land the blow. Then Northern's lips curled into a grin, his eyes lowering in that moment to Aland's incoming sword, a deep void-like light rippling through his pupils. Stainless moved faster than thought, intercepting Alan's sword with a deafening clang. Sparks erupted between them, lighting the grim hall in brief flashes. Northern pointed to his eyes. There is no maneuver, no strategies of yours that I haven't already seen. In fact, shouldn't you already be using this opportunity to run like you intended to? Come on. The door is waiting for you. Alan felt his entire body grow cold. Chapter 640. The Ethereum's Submission Part 1. Where have you been? That red which has been giving all of us hell because she's looking for you. One of the students yelled as he spotted Northern coming out of a corner. He came closer, putting his hands casually on Northern's shoulders. Lael, man, please don't leave her side, so the rest of us can breathe forever. It's too hot without you around her. Northern's eyes shifted down to the hand with a grim expression. Ah, sorry. The rumors were true. You certainly don't like being touched. Haha. The student shifted away from Northern with a slightly pale face, forcing a short smile. He didn't know what happened, but his throat felt itchy and his hands trembled, even as he took them off Northern's shoulders. Northern nonchalantly walked forward, leaving the boy behind. It took a couple of seconds standing alone, dazed and pale, before he eventually got hold of himself and ran to the forge. Alina folded her hands, watching furiously as Northern calmly strolled into the forge. Her expression was slightly tense but hidden so much that only her fiery anger radiated. What do you think you are doing? Storming out of the smithy and being gone for over 10 minutes? Northern bowed his head slightly. I am sorry. There was something I had to take care of urgently. I don't care whatever it was. Get back and start working on the damn mineral before I change my mind. Northern chuckled, smiling with his eyes while suppressing the viciousness that was left from a few minutes ago. Not like Alina was someone he could hurt even if he wanted to. As long as he had so much to gain from her, she was still very useful to him. And he really did need to work on the mineral or... A couple of minutes later, Northern stood before the Ethereum, staring down at it with a hammer in his right hand. He clenched his hand tightly as he assessed the mineral with chaos eyes. This is going to be difficult, Northern muttered. He paused, squinting his eyes as he gazed and gauged the ore, after which Northern lifted his arm. He didn't lift it up too much. What he wanted to do was crush it to small bits, but first, he had to be sure that the resistance of the ore was not going to be destructive. Over the past few weeks, one of the things he had learned in theory was that rift resources, especially mineral ores, have a certain resistance to hammering and heat. Usually, depending on the level of resistance, methods of hammering differ. He himself had experienced something like that with the red crystals. He only got to realize this while the instructors were giving a general lecture about it. The red crystal's bloodlust was its own defensive mechanism, the mineral's way of desperately resisting being removed from its home. Usually, they saw that miners face a more vicious resistance mining ores than blacksmiths who crush them. It was one of the reasons why a mundane human could not be a miner. Northern was curious to see how the Ethereum was going to resist being crushed, or at the very least lash out. He had observed it with chaos eyes and had seen a delicate helix structure of ligatures, quite unique. It was something he had never seen before, and it made him even more sure that rift resources have a will. One could classify them as a living being. It was just that they didn't exactly breathe. But they can grow and have a will. Their resistance to being crushed is, in fact, proof of this. Northern was speculating that with the void creation mechanism that he knew, he would be able to use Soulforge in conjunction with minerals more resourcefully. Perhaps he could start by finding the arc to awaken Granger. With his mind rising optimistically, Northern raised the hammer slightly, not adding so much power as he swung it down on the mineral. Immediately, with a cloud-ripping sound resounding in the heated air, several threads of lightning violently discharged, weaving through the air. Although Northern was unarmed, the discharge seemed to have even ripped the metal table in subtle places. Almost everyone turned their heads in the forge, eyes slightly widened. What is that sound? Someone murmured. I could swear I saw a light just now. Another murmured from a far angle. They glanced at him and murmured even more before returning to their respective works. Northern narrowed his eyes. No one saw that? It seemed to him that no one had exactly been able to capture what happened, except for the thunderous sound and sharp flash of light. No one except him had seen how the lightning had whipped across the air around him, and even torn the table in small holes like sword chips. Northern exhaled deeply, his fingers tightening around the hammer as he examined the mineral. The Ethereum seemed to hum faintly, its subtle sparks resembling a heartbeat. It resisted him, alive, stubborn, and unwilling to yield. His chaos eyes flickered quickly in and out of appearance as he focused on its structure once more. The helix of ligatures pulsed, reinforcing themselves against his attempts. Northern reached out, brushing his fingertips against the mineral. The faint static jolted up his arm, sharp and deliberate. His chaos eyes caught the subtle shift in the mineral's structure, almost as if it were daring him to continue. So, you don't want to submit, do you? Northern thought, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Let's see how far your will goes. This time he didn't raise the hammer immediately. Instead, he summoned the void aura that lingered within him, letting the faint chill seep into the air around him. The forge's heat wavered, and a few nearby smiths looked over, rubbing their arms as if struck by a sudden cold. Northern's voice was low, almost a whisper, as he spoke to the mineral. If you're alive, then you'll feel this. With a swift motion, he brought the hammer down again, the void aura swirling around his arm. The impact sent another surge of lightning whipping through the air, but this time, it was different. The Ethereum didn't just resist, it retaliated. A shockwave erupted from the mineral. Northern tilted his head backward to avoid the sparks and arcs of electricity that lashed at him. Elena, who was coming towards him, was immediately gripped by fear. Her fiery anger was replaced by a flicker of alarm. What the hell did you do? Northern's lips twitched into a smirk. It's fighting back. Fighting back. Elena snapped, stepping forward, her gaze locked on the mineral. Ethereum has resistance, yes, but they don't fight back. What did you do? Northern shrugged. I have no idea. Would it hurt its pride to just give in? Elena slapped her face softly, lowering her head. Oh fuck. What in the world has this nut job done? She observed the mineral and shook her head slightly. After a couple of beats, she said, taming a mineral is not about proving which is stronger. It's about respect. You don't just take your hammer and lash it out at them. Didn't you learn this at Instructor Galliner's class? It starts with a subtle tap with the hammer. Not harmful, your approach is not forced but rather tamed. Then hit after hit, the frequency is raised, until one final strike breaks them apart. Northern tilted his head a bit. Seeing him, Elena's eyes flared. What? It just seems rather unsettling that I have to show respect to a mineral. So what? You want to keep hitting it and destroy the entire forge or get yourself killed. Things like this should be subdued by pure might. I am the blacksmith, it's the mineral that will work to create my art. What deserves respect is a perfection born out of my skill and sweat, not a mineral that grew on some mountainside. Elena stayed silent for a few moments. In her mind, she knew Northern was right. A blacksmith's job was to subdue a mineral and mold it into a weapon. It is the weapon that deserves his respect, not the mineral. The mineral should only be subdued. She had once had this ideology. It wasn't new. Could work for some mineral but a Tier 5 rift resource like an Ethereum. No, that was impossible. It would kill one before they are able to shatter its will. She sighed. Lael, just do as you are told. No, Northern refused, a stubborn light in his eyes. Are you disobeying me right now? If you are going to be mediocre, then you probably do not deserve to be my teacher. Elena's eyes widened. Half a second later, her brows furrowed, flames of anger viciously burning in the depth of her gaze. The entire forge paused whatever they were doing, watching from afar as disagreement boiled between the anger and the student. Northern lifted the hammer to Elena's face. Watch me prove you wrong today. A mineral you subdue into submission is far better than the one you trick into submission. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.